not be joining us this evening.
Thank you. So adoption of the agenda. Do we have any deletions, additions, changes?
Yeah, I'd like to make one addition under the presentations. Karen Kinzer and I would like to make a short presentation regarding the takeaways from the conference we attended the last 2 days called the California Adaptation Forum.
So that would be something that
Would be C under presentation.
normally come under Mayor Council matters, but you'd like to move it forward to item C in presentations?
Please.
With that change, any other?
If we could honor tonight's meeting in remembrance of Jess Salmon, passed away.
Absolutely, absolutely. Good idea.
Okay.
Other than that, I would be fine with approving tonight's agenda.
Okay. Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Brings us to oral communications. 1. Oh, I'm sorry, thank you. So that brings us to presentations. And Tony Lutski is going to give us an overview of the Brisbane Car Show.
Yes.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and council members. I had the privilege of working again with Brisbane resident Tony Lukasik during the planning for the Brisbane Park Car Show that was held in July. And Sherry's going to just go through some pictures so we can show the community who weren't able to be there just what Brisbane, the cars that came in to Brisbane that day and just how the community looked. I wanted to mention that there were a total of 142 cars that came and were on display. They, as you know, were along San Francisco Avenue and up Visitation and in some designated spots in the post office parking lot. Tony worked with Brisbane restaurants Julie's Deli, Melissa's Taqueria, and Mamma Mia Pizza again to offer lunch discounts for car show entrants. And in stopping by Melissa's the other day, the owner, Raphael, was very, very pleased with how the car show went. There were hundreds of people, he said, that came in during the car show, and so he was very happy about that. And also, I wanted to also mention that half of the proceeds are going to the Brisbane Skate Park Fund, and half are going to the Brisbane School District. But the total that came in was $2,673, and that's in direct sales from car show entrants, paying $15 a car, from the Mothers of Brisbane selling water and soda again this year, as well as ticket sales from the raffle items that Tony raffled at the end of the car show. So Tony, though, wanted to make it an even $2,000 donation to each the city's skate park fund and to the Brisbane School District. So he is donating out of his own pocket an additional $1,300. I wanted to just make that known to all of you and for those watching. And I didn't think he was going to mention any of that, so I wanted to just bring that up. And now I'll turn it over to Tony so he can give an overview of how the car show actually went.
Good evening. Overall this year, many more people came to town. I realized that, in the mornings, the deli was closed. So what I'm trying to do next year is trying to figure out to keep the actual businesses, maybe have a breakfast for entrants and people who come into town, so they're not, hey, they didn't know where to go to eat, but lunchtime and everything else, they were fine with. Every year I have this show, you learn something new. Every year you have little problems, and you take care of it. And next year I'm looking forward, if this can happen again, I'm really looking forward to doing this. I'm going to keep the same amount of vehicles. I don't want to come and have cars all over town. I think what we had there was a good group of people. Everybody had a good time. There's no problems. And the kids, they're really happy. And just seeing them around, they're playing around. It's good to see the kids being active, coming over, talking to me. I grew up in a rough part of the city, and vehicles literally kept me straight. And if I could save one of these kids, say, get to this, they get interested in something to get them out of trouble. I did my job, and that's what I want to do. I make sure the kids have another option that, you know, they like to tinker with things, motorcycles, something, get them busy, their brain working. Next year, like I said, I'm going to working with Caroline, and I'd like to go over a few options or ideas with her over the next couple months and see what would work out for next year, if it would work out for the council. And I mean, like I said, thank you very much to everybody here. It was a great turnout, and I hope next year maybe I didn't see some of you. Hopefully, you guys can come down and enjoy the music. I'm really hoping I get a live band next year. I'll pay for a live band and have more music out there at that time also. So I'd like to present to you the check for 2000. Thank you very much. And my wife actually talked to Tony. I forgot her last name. She's director of the BES school. Presta, yes. So my wife delivered a check to them last week. So they have everything. So yeah, I'm pretty much out of my hands into yours now. And thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
On behalf of the city, thank you very much.
Can you stay for a second? I want to just make a couple of comments.
Yeah,
We
so would
all
I.
would like to.
Yeah.
You know, obviously the first is to thank you very much. It's very generous and very nice of you to think of these important causes and what you were talking about, automobiles, getting kids involved and so forth. Resonated with a lot which was said at the memorial service for Jess Salmon, who was one of our original council members.
Mm-hmm.
He was a highly expert car mechanic. In fact, he taught auto mechanics at College in Marin. And he was well known for being able to listen to a car and tell you, just by listening,
What it is.
what was wrong. I don't know whether that's possible anymore with all the computers in cars, but with the old cars you could do that.
Yes.
And so that was kind of, I'm just thinking of the interesting historical connection there. And I'm glad that we're continuing that.
Thank you.
I just had a question of curiosity, which I think I know the answer to.
Mm-hmm.
But we've had car shows both, you know, in downtown Brisbane, but we've also held them out at Sierra Point.
Yes.
You have any comments on the relative pros and cons of those two locations?
Everybody who comes to there's a lot of car people that I know. A lot of car people throw my cars, and everybody who comes to my show likes it because there's people who have never been down here in downtown Brisbane. They say, you know what, we're at the marina all the time. This is good. It's a big enough show. It's not too much, and it's a good amount of people. No problems. They like the feeling of being downtown. They like businesses being around. They like going up and walking up and down the main strip and seeing what's there to offer in town. That's what they like the most, which at the marina they don't get.
Right.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
That's kind of what I expected.
Yeah, and for kids,
Good to have it.
I wanted to have, if it's a skate park fun at school, the skate park is across the street.
Right.
I had jumpers for the kids. They could, play in the park. If I had it at the marina, it wouldn't be
Can't
that
do
good. Yeah.
Right. Got it.
Nothing out there.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you.
No, Tony, don't.
You're not done yet.
No, I just want to thank you so much for putting in your time and your energy and your passion.
Yes.
For cars into the community, and you just, writing that check, man.
Yeah.
that's
It's
that's
the only
huge,
way I know.
man.
That's the only thing I know where I could help out, and that's what I do. And I'll do it again this year. I'll do it again next year.
Well, just talking about helping out, and one of the things that the council has put into the budget is allocating funds for teen services,
Oh, wow.
after school stuff, and
Yes.
so we've put together a program with Littman, and they are looking for folks in the community to give back to students, and someone might be a chef, or someone might be handy with using tools.
Definitely.
And you have this passion for cars, and I was really taken by how cars helped you when you were growing up. It kept you on the straight and narrow, and I would love for you to touch base with the school district.
Sure.
And look into that, because I think there's probably some kids out there that would love to learn about what's under the hood.
Oh, definitely.
They're always driving in the car, but they don't know what's going on inside.
Definitely.
And someone like yourself, I think, would just be a great mentor, for some of these kids.
You could talk to Caroline. She could give you my information. I could go talk to. They had a career day. One of the gentlemen talked to me last week about, and he was like, I want you to come down and talk to the kids about the union. And So, there's a couple of people that already spoke to me about a few things, and I have some things on mind. And the kids in town know me by now, so I don't even know the kids. And they're like, hey, Tony. And I don't know you, but hey, how's it going?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I'm going to make sure that I'm at your event next year.
No
I
problem.
was not there, and I
Keep you to
apologize
that.
for that. But yeah, no, for sure. And,
No problem.
yeah, and I'm glad that you've touched base with Carolyn, and because Carolyn's great at helping the city work with the community to do events.
Yes.
And so I'm glad you guys have a great relationship. So thank you for.
Yeah. And if I could just
all
say
you
a word
do.
also, I heard a lot of positive feedback from the members of the Mothers of Brisbane that, they brought their kids down and you provided the bouncy houses. And,
Yes.
it was a lot of fun for a lot of families. So thank you for bringing, a community event to Brisbane. And also, you mentioned that there wasn't any breakfast option.
No.
You should consider the shopping center because I don't know
Well,
if
that's what
Christie's was open.
Yeah, that's what I did, but the people, they would walk across. So maybe next year what I would have is, I was talking to Caroline, maybe you could set up something there, but there's certain rules on temperature of food, and there's certain things that have to be correct in order to sell at a car show food. And I don't want to bring in taco trucks. I don't bring anything. I want to keep everything within the
Yeah,
town
the-
because
the
everybody
Lion-
was very happy.
the Lions Club. The Lions.
That's another thing.
Yeah, Lori and I are Lions members, and we could reach out to the Lions Club and see if they would do breakfast burritos or something like that.
That's a great idea.
We had
That's
a
perfect.
Zippy 5K race, and they did that for the race. They made breakfast.
Perfect.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
I'll add that to my list too. So it's perfect. Yeah.
So thank you.
All right.
Great, well, thank you very much for
Thank you.
bringing a successful event
Thank you.
to Brisbane.
Thank you, Tony.
Next up is item B, Robert Maynard, the quarterly mosquito and vector control district report.
Good evening. As mentioned, I am Bob Maynard, the trustee for Brisbane for the San Mateo County Mosquito Abatement District. And I've brought along with me this evening Teresa Shelton, who is going to give a presentation. She is the vector ecologist for one of the vector ecologists for the district. And this is a very timely presentation. So I'll go ahead and let her.
All right. Thank you.
Pull the mic down.
Good. Okay. Thank you. So, yes, I'm a vector ecologist for the district, so I work in the lab, and I appreciate this opportunity to go and tell you a little bit about our district and what's going on right now. So you probably heard that this year is particularly bad for West Nile virus in the Bay Area. In fact, in San Mateo County, this is by far our worst year that we've had for West Nile virus. Although that said, we have not had any confirmed human cases in our county. Statewide, there's been 93 so far this year, and 4 of those have been deaths. Those are confirmed cases. Most cases of West Nile virus, the majority of people don't have any symptoms, but 1 in 5 people have what is like a bad flu. And so those people are generally not tested. And even if you have a bad flu, you're probably not being tested for West Nile virus unless your physician for some reason suspects it. So we do miss those. But then about 1% of people who contract it do come down with serious symptoms, and this can be coma, paralysis, or death. So even if you don't die from it, you could be left with permanent brain damage or paralysis. So in our county so far this year, I think I have it. Okay, well, first of all, I want to mention that we've detected West Nile virus so far in 8 birds throughout our county. And this is the best way we have of first detecting West Nile virus, the Dead Bird and Squirrel Hotline. So I had the handout. If you can, any way you can get the word out about the hotline to people who don't know, we always appreciate that. You can do it by phone or online. It goes to the state, and then they give the information directly to us. We don't get a lot of reports from Brisbane. I know it's a small city. There's not a lot of people. But even still, I'm sure there's birds. And even if they don't have West Nile virus, they are probably dying. And I'm sure people are noticing birds, and it's helpful if they call.
and also tree squirrels. If we have, I want to show you, here is our positive birds so far. I don't know if you guys can see, but we've had 8, as I said. They were mostly in the southern part of the county. Santa Clara County has had a tremendous number of birds. I think they're up to about 400 positive birds this year. But then most recently we did find a positive one in South San Francisco. So it is unusual for us to detect West Nile virus further north like that. So when we get a positive bird or squirrel, what we do is we put out mosquito traps. We put 20 out in the surrounding neighborhood. And if we catch any of the Culex mosquitoes, that's the genus that can carry West Nile virus, those are tested for West Nile virus. And we have the capability, it's our first season of being able to test in-house in our laboratory. And this really saves us time to test birds and mosquitoes in-house, and we can respond much quicker this way. Previously, we sent them to the State Department of Public Health, and that can be quite a lag of a week or two. If we get positive mosquitoes, then then Operations Department will fog the surrounding area for mosquitoes. And the latest fogging is scheduled for tonight. It's in South San Francisco because following that bird detected, we did pick up positive mosquitoes there. So it's going to be the northwest corner of South San Francisco, a little bit of Colma, the cemeteries in Colma, and a little bit of Daly City. When we fog, we try to evaluate it the best we can. We put out cages of adult mosquitoes within that range, and we're sure they will be hit by the truck that goes by. And that way we can see the percent mortality among the mosquitoes and make sure the material's working and that they do die. We also put more traps out the next day. We collect them the day after to see the population decline and make sure it was effective. If we catch more Culex mosquitoes, we probably will catch at least a few more. Then we'll test those and to make sure that the virus is gone from the area. So that's our procedure. People have a lot of questions about it, especially when it's in their neighborhood. I'm hoping it won't show up in Brisbane, but if it does, that's what we're going to be doing. Since it's best way to protect yourself from West Nile virus is to avoid a mosquito bite, because once you contract the disease, there's really nothing that can be done at that time. So our precautions for residents: avoid going outdoors during dawn and dusk, wear long sleeves and long pants, wear mosquito repellent, eliminate standing water around your home. If you notice a mosquito problem or you can't eliminate that water, to call the district. Okay, and so that's West Nile virus. And then I was also going to talk a little bit about tick-borne diseases. That's more of our the winter work we do. So, yes.
I want to ask a question about the notification on the West Nile virus. I was just sitting here thinking that maybe it would be a good idea when you discover something like you just did in South San Francisco that the daycare centers would be informed, especially, so to alert the parents of kids and so forth, and also to make sure that there's nothing around the daycare centers that would generate mosquitoes.
Yeah, that's
seem like they're a really important group of population to protect.
Definitely, especially concerned. For West Nile virus, the higher risk is actually the senior citizens. But yeah, of course, parents of young children are very concerned. It's something we're still trying to work out. This is the first year we've ever fogged for West Nile virus, so our notification system could be improved, I'd say. So we have to figure out how to contact those specific groups and get the word out to them. Okay. What we've done so far, because we fogged in 3 cities previously, and we kind of worked with the city at that point. We put it out to the media, the report about fogging, and we put it on our website. And then the different cities seem to have different methods that they can employ. Some have a phone call. This last one, we were able to call each resident through some sort of police system. Some don't want to do that. Some put on this, like San Mateo will put it on their city website, and they have all kinds of newsletters and things they put out. It varies, I guess, what cities are willing to do. So we go with that. Any
Yeah, if I may. So, later on in our agenda, we're going to be talking about water. The drought, and that 2014 is probably going to be the driest of the 3 years that we've had of drought. And so I was surprised to hear that there are more cases that are being detected. So why is that?
Yeah, that's a good question that we're kind of speculating right now. The mosquito population that we've seen in San Mateo County is not higher than usual, perhaps because it is drier. The percentage of infected mosquitoes, though, is much higher. And why that is, we're thinking maybe because it was a mild winter, it didn't get very cold, and maybe the virus was able to hang on throughout the winter and then build up sooner in the spring. That's just, we can't say for sure, but that's kind of a theory why it's been a worse year. I know in San Francisco they are having more of a mosquito problem than usual, and I don't know why that is. But why there's so much virus. The hotter it is, the better it does. So maybe that's a factor.
Okay.
It's still kind of a mystery.
And have there ever been any cases reported in Brisbane?
Of people?
No, of animals.
A bird. I looked through the records actually, and I didn't see any positive birds, and there have not been any positive mosquitoes tested in Brisbane. Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, it's fortunate here. The Culex genus is not really the biggest problem Brisbane has. It's more of there's other mosquitoes in certain areas that are more common and can be more of a nuisance, but they don't carry disease, so that's good for you. Yeah.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, I'll try and talk briefly about ticks. So we have 3 species that commonly bite humans in this county. The Pacific Coast tick, the American dog tick, and the western black-legged tick. It's the western black-legged tick that can carry bacteria for Lyme disease and tick-borne relapsing fever. And these are the majority of tick diseases in our county are those 2.
I see, not to interrupt, but you have a photo on the monitor of the 3 ticks, and which is the tick you're
Thanks.
talking about?
The top one, that's the western black-legged tick.
Okay.
So that's the one we're most concerned with. And we'll collect those ticks within parks in our county. They're more common in the winter time, actually. And then we'll test them, and we can test those in our own lab now to see what the infection rate is in parks. And I put it in a little table. This was our previous year, last winter collections and testing, and you can see the range varies from about 0% to 3%. So it's really a small percent of ticks. You'll see there's 2 bacteria listed. One is Lyme, the Burgdorferi, and the Miyamotoi can cause tick-borne relapsing fever. Both are diseases you'll want to avoid. Now the western black-legged tick, fortunately, again for Brisbane, only seems to occur west of El Camino, typically closer to 280, those parks, and then extending towards the coast, and then it goes down the coast. We did check again, just to be sure. We checked San Bruno Mountain last year too, and we didn't pick any up. So that's good. There are, of course, though, the other 2 ticks. They can carry diseases. They can carry tularemia, and they can carry Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Those are on San Bruno Mountain. Those diseases are both far less common in this county. We don't have the capability to test for those. The state will do it, but only following if someone gets sick. But we are hoping maybe we can expand our program and just to kind of see what's present. So I think that's all I really wanted to say. Just to remind you, we do have our website to refer people to if they have questions about mosquitoes or vectors. And of course, if you have mosquito problems, to call. And we have some request service. Do you have any other questions?
I have one question. While we do have ticks in San Bruno Mountain State Park and in Brisbane, we have not found any disease ticks. Is that correct?
No, we haven't found any, but like I said, we don't test for the particular diseases that those carry in our lab. We currently don't have that capability. If someone was to get sick from Rocky Mountain or tularemia, then we could collect ticks, and the California Department of Public Health would agree at that time to test it for us. But hopefully we can increase our capabilities and test.
But we don't have any reports of anyone in this area being sick either. Correct?
No.
Good.
No.
Thank you.
Pleasure
Thank you.
meeting you. It was a pleasure meeting you.
You too. Thank you.
Bob, did you have anything to add, or?
I should just mention that the district is seeking a new general manager. So that's the only thing new.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you,
very
Bob.
much, Bob.
Appreciate your regular reports.
And that brings us to item C, the report on the California Adaptation Forum from Karen Kinzer and Ray Miller.
Yep. No, Mike.
Can you hear me? Oh, there we go. I'll be brief about what I found, but I found the California Adaptation Forum very interesting. It was the first time they've had this forum in California, and it was really good to think about the fact that we need to be setting our sights on adaptation as well as just conservation and reducing energy usage. I felt like people are still looking for how that's going to be done. They didn't get into a lot of specifics, but definitely there was a strong spirit of working together. The networking was valuable. I was exposed to all kinds of nonprofits that are out there that are working on climate change, all the different ways that local agencies are, and all the different positions that agencies have: sustainability managers, sustainability coordinators. I attended one session about Sonoma County and how they're working together, and they actually have a regional climate protection authority. I thought that was great. And I attended a couple of sessions about community engagement and communication that I thought will be particularly useful for me. So it was definitely a valuable use of my time.
Okay, thank you. Ray?
Yeah, I have a couple of things to add. Agree with everything that Karen said. There were actually 800 people attending, which was way more than they expected. What was impressive to me, which has already been alluded to by Karen, is that they were really all high-level professionals. I mean, the top people in the state and in nonprofits and CEOs of all sorts of consulting firms, and a lot of people from private business. And so it was really a collection of very smart, dedicated people. So it was that's what was enjoyable about it. They were really addressing these issues in a very intelligent way. And that was, that's why it was worth the time. I'd like to make just a couple of highlight points of things that I learned that I think are relevant for Brisbane. One of the things that they're talking about is they want to talk about adaptation rather than mitigation, because they feel that a lot of the things we need to do in responding to the problems created by climate change is that change a lot of the way we do things. And one of the case studies that was brought up several times was the flooding in Thailand. You may remember a few years ago, which basically wiped out the hard drive production of the world. And all these electronic devices that depend on hard drives, when it was near Christmas season, were in big trouble because it turns out that they were all pretty much located in Thailand, in Bangkok. And what was interesting was that the problems of the flooding were significantly exacerbated by the fact that they had filled in the canals and built highways. And the interesting point was made that who funded that? USAID. So this was what was considered the kind of maladaptive behavior that we need to change in order to deal with the kinds of things that we're going to see more of, particularly the extreme weather events as we're seeing all over the place. And they were giving an example of just recently in Baltimore. They had 4 inches of rain in 1 hour. And so, of course, there's just no stormwater system that can deal with that. So, I mean, these are just happening all over the place. The next thing that was interesting, they talked about community choice aggregation. And the person from Marin was there because Marin County has one of the most successful community choice aggregation programs. And I learned from that in order to have a community choice aggregation, which of course is a method for buying energy and getting more renewables so that you can offer more green energy to the people and businesses in town. And usually it can be done at a lower cost than from the private utilities. But they did point out that in order to make this feasible from a business point of view, it takes at least 10,000 customers. But it's also the case that Marin has been open in their joint powers agreement to adding cities from other counties. In fact, Richmond has joined with Marin in their community choice aggregation program. There was legislation that really was negative for CCAs, which was introduced into the legislature, which was supposed to change the current method, which is in order for people not to be a part of it, they have to opt out, which is the current rule, not opt in. And the evidence is that you get a much higher percentage of people participating when it's opt out than when it's opt in. Fortunately, that legislation has been amended, so the threat to CCAs has been reduced. On to the next point. There's a lot of talk about sea level rise. And as we know, we've heard before from a number of people, including those who went to the Sea Level Rise Conference in San Mateo County, that San Mateo County is the most at risk in terms of the amount of coastline and human infrastructure that would be affected by sea level rise of any county in California. And BCDC, which of course has a big responsibility for all around the bay, is very much aware of that, and they're already starting pilot programs. And they have quite a pilot program going on in Alameda County now. And one of the things that the BCDC person said, who's been doing this, is that they want to add another letter to the famous 3 E's of sustainability. You know, the environment, the economy, and equity. They want to add G. G standing for governance, because what they ran into in Alameda County, this is a region-wide problem, sea level rise. But there are several hundred different public entities that they had to coordinate in order to make this happen, which is a nightmare. So that trying to figure out how to do this. Who starts the ball rolling? Who convenes it? Who has the authority to make them participate? So the whole governance issue in this kind of wider problem has not really been solved yet. Moving on to financing, there's a lot of talk about how do you finance a green infrastructure. And there's some ideas like social impact bonds, but that of course depends on having some kind of a program that saves money so that you can use the savings from that money to pay off the obligations for the social impact bonds. It is interesting that Wells Fargo was represented, and they pointed out that they now have an environmental finance department. But it was pointed out by another bank that the fiduciary rules haven't really changed, so that the risks that are associated with climate change are not a justifiable reason, evidently, for charging a higher interest rate for firms that don't address it, or a lower interest rate for firms that do. Evidently, some of the major banks have tried to do that, and the Treasury Department wouldn't let them. So we got a lot of old conventional stuff that's in the way of dealing with a lot of the things that we really need to do. There's a bunch of recent publications that have come out which have made some excellent empirical studies of climate change consequences. I'll just mention three that came up. One is the National Climate Assessment done by the federal government. The other is Risky Business, which is a bipartisan national group. If you've watched the NewsHour, you may have heard Henry Paulson, who's kind of a spokesperson for the group, saying, there's a lot of risk in climate change that businesses need to wake up to. And then the state itself, the state of California, has put out a really comprehensive evaluation of all the risks that California is facing in a publication called Safeguarding California. Just a couple of tidbits from that. The probability of 11-year droughts has now dramatically increased in terms of what the recent evidence suggests. One of the things they pointed out was that the increase in wildfires, which we already see, one of the possible consequences of wildfires is that it may interrupt the transmission lines, and we're highly dependent on energy from the Northwest. And if those transmission lines are interrupted, that could be a serious problem. The projections of how fast sea level rise is going every year in the last 10 years, they've gone up significantly, and so we just keep underestimating. So there's just a lot of things that this adaptation conference is trying to get people aware of the fact that climate change isn't something 50 years from now. It's already, the consequences of it are already happening now. And if we don't get our act together, we got a lot of big problems facing us. And then final point I want to make is that the deputy mayor of Los Angeles had an interesting point, and we've talked about this before, but he said, what we're doing is an overall sustainability plan for the city. And the climate action plan actually is just a part of that. So we've talked about that before, and Cliff will right away know what I'm talking about. And that struck me, if that's what Los Angeles is doing. So, we can do the same. Why not?
Why not?
Why not? Okay, end of my report. Thank you. Answer questions if you have.
No questions? That moves us to oral communications number 1, and I have no slips. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak? Seeing no hands, there was a letter or a note that came from Janet Dilworth that says it is oral communications number 1, and that they were asking about the closed session in our last meeting and whether any actions were taken. and we did not report out any actions at the last meeting.
Mayor Pro Tem O'Connell, that's correct. There was a report out, and there were no actions taken after that closed session.
Okay. And then also, because there was no actions, I'm assuming that there were also no other stakeholders included in that meeting. So that answers the question from her, and she can come with further questions if she has them. So that moves us to the consent calendar. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent calendar as is.
A second.
I'll second.
All those in favor for items A through E on the consent calendar?
Aye.
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 So, just may I mention that
Sure.
one of the things we just approved in the consent calendar was the contract for the grading, paving, what do you call it?
Overlay project.
The overlay, pavement overlay, yes, sir.
Hmm?
Pavement overlay?
Paving overlay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and of course, the city engineer is here, but also the senior engineer associated with that's the reason that Karen's here, and so that's why we went earlier with the presentation, so that once this is through, she doesn't have to hang around anymore.
Okay. I think that means she's been dismissed.
I know she has something else to do.
There are apparently benefits to carpooling with the council member when you're going to sustainability conferences, and Karen is wisely seeing the benefits of those now.
So that moves us to the public hearing on introduction of ordinance 589, which is the adding chapter 8.41 of the municipal code concerning water conservation. And do we have a staff report?
Yes, ma'am, we do. Mayor Pro Tem, council members, good evening. I'll start this off, and after that, we have a plethora of intelligentsia here with us this evening to answer all the hard questions. From city staff, you've got Senior Civil Engineer Jerry Flanagan, who works all of our utility systems. I'm sure you remember him from having gone on the water and sewer systems tour. Assisting the city attorney is Mr. Eugene Park, who did the writing on the ordinance and the research on other people's outside audiences. And also here with us tonight is Ms. Anona Dutton, who's with the consulting firm EKI. This is actually Anona's second trip at the firm EKI. She was there, and then for a number of years she was employed at the Bay Area Water Supply Conservation Agency, where she was a water resources planner. So Jerry and I worked with her during that time period. And now she's back at EKI as a vice president. So,
Oh, okay.
so
Could I
she'll
get
be happy to give us
the name again?
Anona Dutton. And so she'll be giving us a presentation a little bit later on the water supply contingency plan, rather. So, Sherry, can we go to the overhead so we can see this quickly? I'll try and get through here. Thank you. That was perfect. Thank you so much. So, yeah, we're in a drought, and a lot of people kind of think that's a blinding flash of the obvious, but it's really amazing how different people's responses are to that. On the one hand, probably 2 weeks ago, we were doing some water quality dewatering, so we were flushing water through a fire hydrant, and we had citizens on Sierra Point that were rushing out to the gutter with their buckets and capturing that water and bringing it to their planter beds because they had been denying their plants water. Absolutely fabulous. Tells me everybody's doing the right thing. A week after that, I'm driving down the street, and there's somebody hosing down his driveway and the road. And so that's the range of the spectrum we have. And I guess I'm not particularly surprised by that because the messaging that we receive throughout the state hasn't been a whole lot less confusing. We've had the governor issue 2 proclamations requesting that people reduce voluntarily by 20%. The area and the supplier we get our water from, the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, has asked everyone to voluntarily reduce by 10%. Then at the end of July, the State Water Resources Control Board came out and issued mandatory actions, made 4 activities prohibited with fines up to $500, and specified in certain cases that certain water suppliers had very specific things that they had to do, this kind of one-size-fits-all plan across the entire state of California. And I think probably the only good thing that came out of a lot of this is that back in January, when we started preparing the budget, city staff realized that we probably ought to put a drought contingency plan together. So we had put that dollar amount into the budget, and the council approved that for this fiscal year. So as all this came together, we were able to quickly bring EKI on board to work with the city attorney's office and to work with our engineering office. So we're getting something out of this that really makes the most sense for the city of Brisbane. So this is, of course, what we're going to ask you to do tonight is to introduce this ordinance and eventually adopt a water conservation program and have this, what we're always going to refer to as the WSCP. And why do we want to do that? Well, the primary reason is that Brisbane has an incredibly unique consumption profile for water. We, as residents, use less than 50 gallons per capita per day. That is award-winning, and when you juxtapose that to folks who live in a much warmer climate, say the Central Valley or who live down in Southern California, who are using hundreds of gallons of water a day. So what we needed to do is to tailor our system so that we can reduce it, but not get the consumption so low, because when somebody's using 50 gallons of water a day and you ask them to reduce it by 20%, where are they going to go? They're going to have 40 gallons a day? When you compare that to someone who's using 200 and you ask them to reduce by 20%, well, they're still getting 160. And when you start getting down much lower than we are, we're really making it very, very difficult for people to live in their homes. So we wanted to make sure that we didn't have that situation. So how do we get the message out? Well, assuming that this ordinance is going to be introduced and approved by the council this evening, we're going to take a couple of steps. The first thing we're going to do is communicate with people. We've got a water bill mailer that's going to be mailed out. We have already been communicating directly with our biggest water users. In fact, Jerry and I were just communicating about that this morning and talking about people who have had aberrant kind of uses where we're seeing them go up instead of the way we want. We're going to educate people. We're going to encourage people. And the very, very last thing we want to do is enforce people. When you look through the ordinance, you'll see it's somewhat graduated. It doesn't require us to go in there. And the reason we didn't say that the city shall do each and every one of those steps, because we need to save that opportunity for the person that when you go out and say, hey, you can't keep water in the street like that, and they tell you, sure I can. Make me stop. Well, we didn't want to have to go through each and every stop. If we find somebody who's just going to blatantly refuse to comply, then we're going to go right to enforcement on them. But I expect that when we get the information out, people are going to want to do the right thing. That's certainly the history that we find with Brisbane. So I get that to move. So I realize these slides are not going to be particularly readable, but they're intended to be placeholders when I talk. This is the first thing that we're going to do. This is the communication that we're going to send out. This is the flyer that we're going to start stuffing into the water bills, which are due to go out next week. So this will be the way we start telling people, hey, there are some prohibited actions out there. The council is adopting a new ordinance. These things are going to be requirements. Now you've got to do that. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to have, this is called a report of non-essential water use. We're going to hand it out certainly to the water utility teams. There's probably other departments in the city we're going to ask to use it, so that when our employees are driving around and they see a water waste going on, they can simply take that out, check the box, and hand it to the person or put it on their door. It'll be a door flyer. So you can say, hey, you probably didn't know these things were illegal now. They are illegal. We're identifying it to you. Beyond that, the thing that steps it up next is we start using the administrative citation section of our municipal code. And this is a notice of violation. The distinction about when you get to here is that you're still not fining people when you get to this point, but these forms, you may be able to tell that they're serialized. So what happens is once we get to this stage, we are starting to track who we've given them to. We can go back and say, hey, we've already been out here. We've got proof that we've already told you about this. And so the next time we go out, after this is issued, if they're still not in compliance and they're still doing the same thing, the next thing we do is go to the administrative citation, which is where we start with the graduated fines, where we can go $100, $200, $500 fines until we get people's full compliance. So with that, I think the first thing I'd like to do is, I know that Eugene and Councilmember Liu had some conversations about some suggested changes to the ordinance. So I'd ask Eugene to cover that first, and then we'll go to Anona's presentation.
Good evening. We just had a handful of minor clarifications and edits that we made, and I can point those out to you. If you look at section 050, this is the stage 1 drought response measures.
What page is that on?
This is on page 4.
This is the revised one?
Of the of the handout that Lori.
Oh, this is
So there should be a new
Right.
handout that the city clerk gave you, and if you go to page 4 of it, the changes will be redlined in there.
Easy answer, right?
And I think Eugene's going to read it out loud for us so the people listening or the people who got it on the website will know which changes are being made as this is introduced.
right. In that section 050, if you look at the second paragraph, the purpose of this paragraph is to describe the overall goal of the measure, which is to reduce water usage from previous usage. The way it was worded previously simply said the city's water usage, and here, and we understood from Councilmember Liu that may be ambiguous, that may be referring to the city as a customer. Obviously, that's not what we meant. So the edited version reads, the overall goal of the Stage 1 drought response measures is to reduce water usage by the city and its water consumers by at least 10% of the average annual use by the city and its water consumers. So it's purely a clarification. The same edit is made for stages 2, 3, and 4.
Good change.
Yeah, no, it was very good.
Good catch.
Yeah, so that was a very good catch. And then we added a period in section 040. That was inadvertently omitted.
Lori's a fabulous proof.
I do like to review ordinances.
So with
the
that,
deleted
I'm
territory.
going to need the city clerk to tee up the next presentation, and I've lost the city clerk. I've lost all control of staff at this point in time. I'm willing to stipulate to that. Let me see if I can't find her quickly. The deserter has been found. Yeah, here. There you go. That'll work.
Good evening. My name is Anona Dutton. I'm with Erler and Kalinowski, and it's a pleasure to be here tonight to talk about the city's new water shortage contingency plan. It's kind of a mouthful, so I kind of stumble on the title sometimes. But this plan really represents, I think, a big step forward for the city in terms of putting together a framework to respond to this drought, future droughts, and sort of line the city up to comply with the new state board regulations as well. So what I'd like to go over tonight are just some of the historical water use data that really define the water use profile of the city and set us up for evaluating water use in the way we could save water during a drought. Talk about the guiding principle that really was sort of the bedrock for how we went about developing the plan itself, some of the key elements that are encompassed in the plan, and in particular the stages of action and the recommended water conservation actions, which is really the meat of the effort. So just getting to the punchline, what the water use data show is that water use in the city has been relatively consistent over recent years. As Randy alluded to, the customers are already extremely water efficient within the city, so we have to respect that when thinking about how we can approach drought. And what our modeling has indicated is that there is sufficient discretionary use that we can achieve our target water use savings if we're sort of artful in terms of how we approach water savings. So some of the data here, as you can see, over the last 5 years or so, water use has been pretty consistent at about 200 million gallons per year. However, there is significant seasonal variation, and this is really driven by increased irrigation demand during the warmer months. And in total, this outdoor irrigation demand is about 42% of Brisbane's total water use. However, how that use is apportioned between the different customer sectors is different, and you can see in residential, it only accounts for about 10% of the water use. It's a little bit more in commercial, and obviously dedicated irrigation is 100% outdoor. If you parse the data a little differently, what you can see is that water use in the dedicated irrigation sector is about 32% of the total water use in the city. So when you think about how the city can respond to drought, this is really the biggest knob that you have to turn. This is sort of further emphasized when you look at the per capita water use data for the city on the residential basis. So Brisbane is about 50 gallons per capita per day for residential. That's about 2/3 of what the average person in the Bosca region uses, and it's less than half of what the average person in California uses. So again, when we look at how we're going to respond to drought here, there's a limited sort of emphasis we can put on what our residential customers can do. I say our because this is your plan. I'm speaking as you. But so this these data and then kind of the priorities of the city that were articulated by Randy and others form the basis of the guiding principle for the development of this plan, which is really to eliminate water waste and prioritize reduction of non-essential water uses. And these were really defined as uses such as landscape irrigation and other discretionary outdoor water use, allowing the city to give the highest priority to preserving water uses that were essential to the health, safety, welfare, and economic vitality of the city's customers. So again, this provided the framework through which we approached the plan. What also guided our development of the plan was Section 10632 of the California Water Code. And what this does is it requires that water shortage contingency plans for large water suppliers contain these 9 elements here. Now, because of Brisbane's size, you're not technically required to have a plan that encompasses all these elements. But we wanted this plan to be the functional equivalent of a plan developed pursuant to Section 10632 of the Water Code. So I'm not going to go through all these elements of the plan here tonight. They all are in the document that you have in addition to some other information. What I'll focus on tonight are the stages of action and the consumption reduction measures. And really that's how much water do you need to save and how are you going to do it. So the city has identified 4 stages of action, and these are really step functions between saving 10 and 20% of water, and they also represent differences as to whether the reductions are considered voluntary or mandatory. So the allocation methodology that was developed to target and achieve those level of water savings were really, again, based on the water use profile of the city, based on the guiding principles, and so they really focus on reduction of outdoor water use. We try to make the actions as few and as simple as possible to make messaging, enforcement, and compliance as easy as possible for the customers in the city. We wanted to provide as much flexibility as possible for people to comply and meet the savings objectives. And we also wanted to make it clear and distinguish between what actions were going to be taken on the part of the city and what actions were going to be requested on the part of the customers for each stage. So I know there's a lot of information on this slide. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but really sort of at a high level talk about what's in each stage of action. So in stage 1, when you're in the voluntary 10% stage, what that's going to look like is increased public outreach on the part of the city to the customers, additional promotion of the existing water conservation programs, coordination with regional entities such as Bosca and San Francisco to leverage information that they might be developing in response to the drought, and some modification to city operations to reduce water waste or unaccounted for water in that, on that side of the house. In terms of what's going to be asked of customers, we're going to start restricting the use of potable water for discretionary outdoor uses, including some limitations on irrigation during the day. Messaging on water conservation is going to come in different forms, whether it's in restaurants or hotels, in terms of just having people recognize and put a value on how they're using the water. And, one of the things that's going to become increasingly important as we go into these shortage conditions is whether or not the city's going to approve new water service connections. Because on one hand, if you're asking your customers to serve, you're kind of in a potential bind with new applicants coming to town asking for water service. You know, at the least, you're kind of putting an unfair burden on your customers. At the worst, it's going to prevent you from meeting your water savings goals. So that's something that will start to be evaluated, you know, when we enter these even stage 1 conditions. When we move into stage 2, when we're talking about mandatory cutbacks, we're doing everything that we did in stage 1. We're ratcheting up our public outreach. We're conducting additional staff training. We are increasing the restrictions on landscape irrigation to further reduce outdoor water use or emphasize that objective. And what our modeling indicates to us is that if we do these actions and we're successful in the implementation and enforcement, we can meet our water savings goals with little to no impact on the residential and commercial sectors. The majority of the burden of these stages of cutbacks are felt in the dedicated irrigation accounts, and again, this is where our most discretionary use of water is occurring. When we move to stage 3, we're talking about a 20% voluntary cutback. 20% cutbacks in a water efficient city are, you know, a challenge. We're going to continue doing what's been done as part of stages 1 and 2 with increased, you know, engagement with the public and other major water users in the city. We're going to start restricting landscape irrigation to a couple of days a week. And again, this issue of new water service accounts, you know, in this case, any new water service account is going to be met with a great deal of scrutiny as to what the impact of that account would be on the overall water use picture of the city. And water budgets are going to be established for the dedicated irrigation accounts, which are going to incentivize water savings even more in that sector. Once we get to stage 4, mandatory 20%, this is really the rubber hitting the road. Everyone is going to be asked to give in order to make this savings realized. So we're going to be doing everything in the prior stages with, you know, some exceptions. Landscape irrigation is going to be prohibited. You know, we're going to be establishing water budgets for every account in the city and holding people accountable to that. And basically, you can see the impact here is that under sort of a stage 3 and 4 scenario, when we are trying to save a significant percentage of the city's water use, every account is going to contribute to those savings, whether it's residential or dedicated irrigation. So we do see a commensurate drop in residential gallons per capita per day down to about 48, which is, again, extremely low and but doable. You know, I think this is something that if everyone does their part, the city can make its savings goals. So an often overlooked part of these water shortage contingency plans is an implementation plan element. And so, you know, a lot of cities will have a plan in place, but when a drought comes, they're, you know, how do they actually go about making it happen and making the savings occur? So your plan does include an implementation plan, and it describes sort of how a drought shortage or a water shortage emergency is declared, what stage of action is determined, how the public is noticed, how additional resources are requested, how, you know, implementation and enforcement will occur, and then importantly, how a determination is made and noticed that the water shortage emergency has come to an end. So that whole process is outlined in the plan as well. So at the end of this, what the city has is a plan and a set of procedures in place that you can rely on to navigate this drought and, you know, future ones. It provides guidance to the city and its customers as to how they can achieve the necessary water savings. It does allow for implementation flexibility on the part of the city and the customers, as well as outlines an appeals process. So if a customer is really sort of being unduly impacted by a restriction here, they have an opportunity to make a case for relief with the city. And what's really important to note is that this is, in a sense, a living document. Brisbane's water use patterns are different than they were historically. They will continue to evolve. And so this is a plan that should be updated on a, regular basis to reflect, significant changes in water use patterns, significant changes in water supply reliability, and other drivers that might, make the city want to revisit this and sort of think alternatively about how it wants to approach drought in the future. So with that, I'm done and happy to take any questions or defer to Randy.
Lori?
Thank you for the presentation and all the information. So maybe this is a question for Randy. Where do you see us starting? Are you planning on declaring a need for stage 1 right away? Or
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. We've already received that request from SFPUC for the 10% voluntary reduction, so we would go right to stage 1.
Okay. And do you have, it seems like it's pretty discretionary for when we move through the stages. Are there, what are the markers that you're looking at for how to know when the next stage would be?
Primarily, the markers are when the people we get our water from ask us to do it.
Okay.
It's sort of peculiar because we are actually already bound to them by our water supply agreement, our individual supply contracts, and then we are bound with our customers in the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency with how we have to manage that water amongst us. So really what this does is it allows us to formalize a plan so that we can implement it. So as soon as we're asked to do that, we can move forward and start getting the reductions we need.
Okay, great. So let me see if I had any other questions. Are we reserving comments until after the public hearing? Is this just a time for questions?
Completely up to the council's discretion. We have a robust public in attendance here, so you may or may not want to open the public hearing now.
I did have a
just so you
couple
can
of
go through the
comments
formality.
that I can reserve until after the public has had a chance to speak. So that's all for now.
Okay. I was thinking that we would take staff and council questions and then open the public comment period.
That's fine.
And then we can certainly have a discussion after that. So that was my
Sounds good.
general plan, but
Sounds
feel free to correct me
No,
if you feel I'm
Sounds good to me.
not doing it in the right method.
No, that's fine.
Actually, I did have one other question. So with respect to the city's water usage, what does the city have in mind to help reduce water usage, and what kind of, I know that, for example, up at the Ridge, our HOA recently moved to these irrigation-controlled systems that respond to weather by use of, some GPS technology, and they can, look at the forecast and see what's happened, whether it's rained, whether there's actually a need for irrigation on a day-to-day and I suppose hourly basis. So, I'm wondering if the city has considered using that technology.
We haven't considered going to that technology primarily because of the cost, although frankly we have been reducing our consumption. The city is the biggest water user in Brisbane. It's our irrigation accounts because we operate the most public space. We operate a lot of ball fields. We have community parks. There's Sierra Point Landscape and Lighting District, which is a little bit outside of it. And we've already received complaints because we're starting to let some of the fields go a little green. And that's what we're doing intentionally. So Jerry sits down with the Buildings and Grounds Department once a month. We review the water consumption that's going on. We make sure that they're tracking. And frankly, we dial it down. It's a difficult thing not to manage, but to manage people's expectations, because if you're a gardener, if you're a landscaper, the easiest way to make sure that your lawn looks healthy and green is to crank up the water. We're in a drought. We can't crank up the water. So what we have to do is continue to reduce the water, to continue to back down the amount of water we're spreading. And in some cases, we are going to new technologies where we can and where it makes sense. We've gone away from the Rainbird sort of spray nozzle that we have, and we've gone to something that's called an MP. It's a matched precipitation rotator, and that's a fancy way of saying that it's a sprinkler head that, to the extent that a mechanical device can, mimics natural rainfall. So you end up with a lot less runoff. You end up with water that's more readily observed. So that's the way we're doing it, and that's the way we're managing every month. And we're actually, I think this month, Jerry, we saw a 15% reduction from last month. So it's significant, and that's important for us, particularly during this time of year, because when it's hot, This is when people want to go out there and crank up the water, and they don't want to see their lawn dying. And this is the time when you can really make the most savings and really get towards the goal we're trying to achieve. And what we're trying to achieve as an area, San Francisco is trying to throughout its service area, trying to save 8 billion gallons of water. Because that way, if they have an extended drought, they have water they can continue to provide for potable sources.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you, Inanna, for the presentation. And I'm glad to hear that the contingency plan is a living document. And one of my questions was, can we use this for future droughts? And the answer is yes. And I'm glad that we're putting this in place and something that we can modify and adapt to as needed. Let's see. So there's a question for you, Randy. So SFPUC has issued the request for the 10% voluntary reduction.
Correct. Yes, sir.
Okay. And so you can kind of just give us a general kind of breakdown of the contract that we have with them. We've talked about it in previous water discussions about how our contract is, the more you use, the less it costs, and then the more we save, then we kind of go into, I guess, a different tier. So if you can kind of, or maybe that isn't how it is.
Well, it could be, sir. But which piece of it are you wanting me to talk about?
So in here that you talked a little bit about how, if we conserve too much, then that could raise the rates on folks.
Sure.
So yeah.
Sure. That piece of it. Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the really good things, or one of the really good intended things that people did starting back in the 1970s, was that people created their water rates with tiers, and the tiers were intended to promote conservation. That's why they had them. So you had a base cost, and then you had your tiers. And with water getting increasingly higher, very much like what you see on your PG&E bill, for those of you who track it, if you have kids that play on the computer nonstop, you always get the little emails from PG&E that you're going into another tier. The same thing happens with water. But unfortunately, as all of those districts, us included, as we went out over the years, you couldn't be making a giant profit on your water bill. So you started to, as you were going back and figuring out what your water rates would be, to make that work out and to make it more or less even, so you weren't just making a huge profit, you didn't cover all of your fixed costs in the fixed capacity charge or in the meter charge that shows up on your bill. So you spread that out across the tiers because you sort of have an idea from past consumption periods how much water people were going to use. So the problem with that now is that we have two components to our water charges, right? We have the fixed charge and then we have the variable charge. One based on how much water you use, one regardless of whether you use any water at all. Well, if you don't use any water at all, we still need to operate the water system.
Sure.
We still need to operate the tanks. We still need to operate the pump stations. We still need to cycle water. In fact, we'd have to flush water and move it through the system so that it would be properly disinfected when you wanted to use it. There are still real costs there. We would not be able to capture the real cost of operating that system if everybody stopped using water today. Mm-hmm. So that's the challenge we get to, is that I certainly think that if we go to a 20% reduction, we will be at the point where we will have to come back and revisit our water rate structure, or make a conscious decision that we are going to run in the red in the utility funds for some time period.
Okay, so if you could just clarify, so in this type of structure that we have, is it based on the contract that we have with SFPUC, or is it just something that
that's our own issue, sir?
That's our own issue.
It's our own issue,
okay,
sir.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that, because if they're asking us to reduce, then we should be able to get some kind of adjusted rate to help absorb that those fixed costs that we have to do.
But unfortunately, I think the way they do their rates is they have the same problem we do, and the way their water rates, the way BAUSCA negotiates the water rates and reviews what SFPUC is putting forward, is they look at this year. They look at what it cost them to operate the system last year. And so they get a unit cost based on that. And with some minor fudging, they say, okay, that's what the unit cost is going to be next year. So they figure unit cost. And then they go to their customers and they say, how much water are you going to use? And then they say, okay, so that's how much water we're going to use. So then they have to take their total costs, divide it by the water, and get what your new rate is going to be. So they still have fixed costs too. Because the problem we all run into with water is that if you could tell me how much water you were going to use next month and when you were going to need it, and that you weren't going to need any in between, I could manage the system very differently. But that's not the way it is. Everybody wants their water on when it's on. They expect that any time, if they get up in the middle of the night and turn on the tap, they expect a glass of water to come out. And that happens everywhere, just about, in the United States. It doesn't happen everywhere throughout the world. But we have that luxury here. So it's a challenging system to operate because we have to keep it ready at all time. The water is always going to be potable. You'll recall that we had one incident where we had a running total over a quarterly period where, we had a peak, and then we went through months and months of extra retesting to do that because we were over by a couple parts per billion, which, and as the analogy I've used, a couple parts per billion is a couple grains of sand at the bottom of an Olympic swimming pool. That's how much it is, and that's what we were over by. I think it was 3, Jerry, is that right? Something like 3 parts per billion. It's lost. It's lost in the noise. But because there's a rule and a regulation, we've got to monitor it, and we've got to spend all that money to do it. And our wholesaler is stuck with that as well, sir.
Okay, no, that makes sense. And then just, if we didn't do the contingency plan, then, we're stuck with the taking, the orders from the SWRCB.
We would have to divide the city into zones and go to mandatory maximum 2 days per week of irrigation now.
Yeah.
We actually should have technically done that if that's what we were going to do at the end of July when the order went into effect. That's really when it became law.
Yeah.
And that's part of what we're trying to avoid, and what you'll note in here is that because of our unique consumption patterns, we don't have to go to that extreme until stage 3.
I'm glad to see that the state has given cities some flexibility because of unique situations, instead of just having across the board type of, okay, you must do this, and that's the way it's going to be. Everyone's, so.
It is, and if I may, I'd like to jump in on one more thing you said, sir, just because I think it's important. You noted that, we've got the water shortage contingency plan, and it's separate from the ordinance. And we did that very, very intentionally. We didn't want to create something, the WSCP, and embed that into the ordinance and make that be the law of the land, because it takes us a couple of months to change the law of the land, and things happen outside of that are different. I know part of what we did is we went back and we looked at this. We looked at the city's response to the droughts in the 70s, the droughts in the 80s, the droughts in the early 90s, the drought period we had in 05 to 07, and then everything that's changed since then, including state law, because the Urban Water Management Planning Act was 1983, came into effect. So there are always things changing, and so we've got the basis of having authority and having stages as law, but we're allowed to work on that administratively and be nimble and be adept and make those changes as we need to.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure.
That's it.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions. Excuse me. In reference to the water rate issue, heard a number of interesting things that I didn't mention at the adaptation conference, one of which was from the former mayor of Santa Cruz, who said that one of the things that they did was to change their basic fee. Instead of having the same fee for all water users, they make a distinction based on elevation,
right,
due to the fact that it cost dough to pump it up there. And it was interesting because they ran into the same problem. The people were conserving, and then they weren't getting enough revenue to cover their costs, and so they figured, so how do we change the rate structure to respond to the situation? And evidently they got away with it, and because the people up in the higher elevations, generally speaking, are more affluent. So it also had an equity quality to it. So I thought that was kind of an interesting solution, or at least one solution anyway.
Jerry has been shocked every time I bring that up to him, sir, because we've talked about it. The wholesaler that I worked at prior in Ventura County did that to all of its retail customers. And because in that case, it was a significant dollar amount. You were talking about pumping millions of gallons of water a day to one customer and having to lift it hundreds and hundreds of feet, so the electricity costs were exorbitant. So we did charge different retail customers different amounts.
Okay.
It'd be exciting to do. We could certainly, we have the information to do it here.
Whether it's a good idea or
I look
not,
forward
don't know,
to the
but
sustainability plan, perhaps bringing that forward. And
Maybe we
seeing
can
how
talk about that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Good conversation.
Yeah.
We might have more people in the audience.
Yeah, well, for sure. Yeah, probably won't have enough room. So I have another question, and something you just referred to, and this is kind of in sort of all your bailiwicks. It's not exactly clear to me the legal enforcement qualities of the contingency plan, because as you just said, it's not really a part of the ordinance per se, and there seems to be a lot of discretion on the part of the director to do this or that and the other. So then, could that be challenged legally? So it's not clear to me how much real strong enforceability we have with the contingency plan.
Councilmember Miller, good question. And the way the ordinance is structured, the water conservation contingency plan is referenced and adopted by the ordinance, although it's up to the discretion of the director to implement the various levels. So because of the fact that it is referenced, it is anticipated in the ordinance that the way it will be applied is through the discretion of the director in setting those various levels. I don't think that there's an issue with the enforceability, particularly under the two mandatory provisions.
And if I may play junior city attorney, or practicing law without a license, I think it's similar to other sections we have in the municipal code, and the one that came to my mind and why I wanted to is that, for instance, when you look at the stormwater discharge control section of our municipal code, we require people to comply with all requirements issued by the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board, which we reference as currently the municipal regional permit, and any additions or amendments thereto. So there's a document that's referenced, the authority to enforce is in the ordinance, but it is saying that, yes, the document you actually have to follow is out here, and it could change.
If I may, that's also very common with like green building ordinances or things like that, because you want again, to be able to reference the most recent version of, for example, the green building code or something. So you will often refer to an external and sort of changing document as your enforceable.
Yeah, the part that I was a little bit unclear about was, the discretionary changing part, and whether somebody, could challenge that. And what you're saying is probably not, right?
In adopting the ordinance, the council is making a determination that the structure of the ordinance with the water conservation contingency plan is appropriately structured, and basically delegating the authority to the director to make those decisions. So the council, by giving that authority, is legally authorizing the director to implement that plan.
Okay. Glad to hear that. Thank you. A couple other things. The basic violation of the water shortage ordinance has, it's a misdemeanor and can put you in jail, which is probably highly unlikely. But then there's a fine. But the maximum amount, at least for the violation, not the administrative part, is $1,000. And I don't know, that strikes me for a big business. That, you said the big problem of water use is the dedicated irrigation. Of course, you got the city, and then you got some big business users. For a big business users, $1,000 is a drop in the bucket. So you know, it doesn't seem like much of a deterrent. So I'm wondering what you have to say about that.
So in Soto Voce conversation over here with David, it's the $1,000 is prescribed by state law because it's a misdemeanor. I would suggest that the piece that really helps us here is the ability to terminate water service, which is further down in the list of things you can do.
Yeah.
That's where you really hurt somebody. You just
Yeah.
say, well, you're done. You know, and if it's a non-essential use, if it's a life, health, and safety use, we've got the note in there that you can put a flow restricting device in because
Right.
you can't leave a
Contingency,
household without
yeah.
any water.
Right.
But a business you could.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe that's something, you know, that the state ought to think about changing. It seems like it's a really out-of-date figure.
Councilmember Miller, another point is that I believe that we'd be able to consider each separate day of violation perhaps as a separate violation of the ordinance, so that you're correct that the $1,000 would be the maximum, but if that continued, as we do with other violations of city ordinances, we consider each day a separate violation. So 30 days would add up to $30,000, which would be a pretty significant impact.
Yeah. So one of the other things in the contingency plan is talking about, you know, getting data so that you know what's happening. And now we do it on a, you know, bi-monthly, which is, you know, it's a lot of time in between if you're trying to really deal with an emergency. And then so there's a talk about, you know, making more, you know, frequent bills, more frequent metering and so forth. But the way it's stated here, I'm looking at page 22, it seems as if it would be an across-the-board thing. And it strikes me again that, you know, maybe what we, you know, want to go after first are the, you know, the big users. You know, why bother the, you know, the small users with, you know, additional metering and bills and so forth, more frequent things, when in fact they're not a big deal. It's the big users that are probably the issue here. Just a question.
That's an interesting point. In fact, that is what we're doing. That's what we're doing right now. That's why we've gone out and we've got select accounts that we go out and we read more regularly because they are the big water users. I think what we were probably envisioning as we put that together is that most people are going, and where we anticipate we're going is to automated meter reading, so that information is readily available, so that it appears more quickly. Again, a lot of these conversations Jerry and I have on a regular basis about realigning the days that we read the meters so that they're more consistent with the days that we're billed from SFPUC, putting them at a different time of the month, and having to do them more frequently. I don't really envision that we are going to have to go to monthly reads until we get to the 20% level, and that's the point in time. You have to do it. You have to have enough current data, and frankly, even monthly is tough for us. I think so. Eventually, we'll get to the point where we have the AMR type system, but the challenge with that is going to be how we roll it out. You know, what instrumentation we use to bring the data back here to us. I mean, there are people out there right now that have automated meter reads that they can get hourly data, and they can provide that to their customers if they want to. Oftentimes, it's run off fiber optic cables, which you've got to lay throughout town, or you've got to hang off poles, or you've got to, you know, set up multiple radio frequency type receiving sites in different locations so that they can pick up all the new meter heads, the readers that you put on there. It's a challenge for us right now because even though our meters are not manually read, they're read by a stick. You know, we've got the Fireflies, which are now reaching the end of their technological life. They're on the far end of the technology curve. They're so cheap you can't even buy them anymore because the product is just, you know, not current. So it's hard. It takes us every bit of 3 to 4 days to read those, Jerry, to read all the meters in town. And that's just to read it. And then there's a day or two of data manipulation that goes on. So it's 6-person days is what it would take. And actually that's why we're kind of doing it the way we are doing it, where we're looking at the big irrigation accounts. Because I don't want to have to come in here for a 10% voluntary reduction and tell the council that I need more budget so I can hire, you know, 6-person days a month to get this done.
Mm-hmm. So I guess, you know, since there is some discretion here, maybe, you know, making that clear in the plan.
Sure.
What you're actually doing.
Sure.
Might make some sense.
Sure. We can take a look at that. Sure. Absolutely. Thank you.
So I have just one other thing that sort of came to my mind as I was, listening to what Cliff was saying. And you were saying the biggest user is the city water users because of all the park landscape and the fields and so forth. And then when I heard at the, at this conference, the likelihood of droughts, not being just 2 or 3 years, but 11 years,
right.
Which has happened in the past, but the probability of that happening is now something like 300% more because of climate change already. I mean, an 11-year drought, and you're really doing, not much of a watering job on landscaping. A lot of it's going to get in pretty bad shape over that long a period of time. One of the things that I guess we really need to look at the whole. What should we have as landscaping, and part of it is should it be natural, and there are other options obviously. Whether that's good or not is something to be discussed. But I also noticed even with the with the natural landscaping, a lot of the problem in some of the places where you get uneven water distribution because of underlying drainage problems. You see that some places got a lot of water and the grass there is nice and green, and other places it's not doing so well, and so that's a big task to figure all that out and get that corrected. So I don't know. I'm just thinking we probably need to start giving some real attention to how do we deal with maintaining our landscapes over the long period of time if we have 11-year drought.
You are verbalizing some of the conversations that we've had over many years now, sir. That's exactly what we've been thinking about. And I look at it initially, and my first response to that is probably when Crocker Industrial Park was master planned, it seemed like a great idea to have ornamental lawn in there. I think in the condition we are in now and what we are facing, nobody would make that decision. We would decide that native grasses, things that did not need water supply from Hetch Hetchy, would be what we'd put out there. Then the conversation does come down to, though, is should anyone in California, whether it's low or high desert where you live, have ornamental grass to recreate on? I think a lot of people would say yes. I think I would suggest that absolutely we ought to have a community park, and it ought to have grass in some sort of condition. I think the playing fields are another conversation. I think there are some playing fields that at some point in time we might say, maybe we'll just buckle down and go with artificial turf or something like a soccer field that's heavily utilized. It starts to make sense. They're expensive. It's $1 million. They're pricey, and they're not maintenance free. You still have costs with them that you've done. There's things that have to happen, but maybe that makes sense. But maybe there are some other parks that are, I would say, like maybe where the Pee-wees play. Let me use BES as an example, BES Upper. Maybe that ought to be grass. Maybe it doesn't make sense to make something that size be AstroTurf. But those are conversations we're going to have, and they're certainly going to be exacerbated by things like an 11-year drought. Because you're going to get to a point where it's not going to be a matter of, whether you ought to have a grass field there or not. It's going to be, are you going to have a field or not? Because you're not going to have water for that field, and your choice is going to be, well, we can go back to dirt lot baseball, or we can go to AstroTurf, but it's not going to be grass. It's not going to be mowed.
Right.
And if I could just add to that, I was recently in New Jersey, and I saw this new park in Jersey City that has artificial grass in it, and it's real grass surrounding it, and it says that it's only to be used for casual sports, no cleats, so you have to think about like what kind of wear could be used on artificial grass. But it certainly is a good option. I know personally in our backyard that's what we have, and it requires no water, and for casual recreation is great, and I think also sets a really good example for the city to be doing that. So
on the comment of artificial grasses and artificial turf, it actually, the water issue aside, is much worse for the environment because of the plastic, the non-recyclability of it, and it has a lot of issues on its own. So artificial turf is certainly not the end-all be-all and is not a solution in any way environmentally for playing fields or lawns, in my opinion. But we're talking about water and not about the other environmental aspects of it and the production of oil-based plastics to put down to make it look green and make it look pretty. So it is something to be investigated and has major costs and has certainly upkeep. It's just different than the water usage. Continue. Sorry.
I'm through.
Okay. I guess it's my turn. I have a couple questions for staff. On the page 4 of the discussion, it has a paragraph that talks about that that this ordinance does not provide staff with the authority to act without receipt of requests, directives from external governing authorities. Is that meaning that the city or the director cannot implement stage 2, 3, or 4 unless it's been declared by our water source?
That's correct, ma'am. I can't independently do that.
You just can't say Randy's role?
Yeah, Randy thinks you guys ought to stop using so much water. Okay. No, it's got to be the demand or the request from our present water supplier, SFPUC.
Okay. And then on the stage 1 drought responses, you touched on the new water hookups and
Yes, ma'am.
that those will need to be looked at in stage 1 drought responses. And what stage would we, is this something that we need to look at, whether it's economically viable for us to go ahead and authorize new water hookups for unplanned uses? Where does the discretion on that lie?
Well, that's a great question, and unfortunately, I'm dealing with it right now. So just round numbers. Let's just say round numbers, we use 500,000 gallons of water a day, 500,000 gallons. So we're asked to cut back by 10%. That's 50,000 gallons that we're asked to cut back. We've got a new business, wants to move to town, has requested a water service to consume 80,000 gallons of water a day. So for us to bring that new business into town and meet our reductions, we need to cut 130,000 gallons of water. So my initial response to that business is, I just don't see how I'm going to give you a water meter. And so we're in conversations with them right now. They're trying to relocate from San Francisco. So we are in conversations where San Francisco would have a temporary arrangement with us where they would transfer that water allotment to us at no expense and without having an impact on the amount of water we're being reduced. So it's a temporary reduction. But that's the type of issue that we run into, and that's a real issue. On the other hand, we've got another business coming into town that looks like they're going to average 4,000 gallons a day. That's a little more manageable. That's something we're considering and we're looking at really hard. The conversation we're having with them, though, is they said, well, geez, but our 3-year plan, that might double. And so my response is, well, during the drought, as long as the drought's on, I would be comfortable, when I say it like that, giving you 4,000 gallons a day, but I can't tell you that 7,000 gallons a day are going to be available. So that's where the discretion comes in, and that's where I haven't had a situation yet where it's been something that would be incredibly unusual that I'd have to bring to the city manager, although that would be my next step. Because I suppose you could imagine there might be a case where someone would come in and say, hey, we want to use 10,000 gallons a day, and by the way, we're going to generate $2 million of sales tax for you.
Yeah.
That might be something you'd weigh off and go, oh, well, geez, maybe I might have to do the math and see if we're going to be able to achieve water reduction somewhere else. Can we back down our irrigation accounts? Or might it just be worth it to recognize that, yeah, we're in a drought, but that's a new business, it's a new customer, and let's just pay the extra fees, because we might get a fine for it, depending upon what level of drought we're in And whether, when it gets to the point that we have a mandatory reduction from San Francisco, we might say, well, it pencils out to just pay a fee.
Okay. And then also on the water usage, that the charts we have on page 4 of the EKI document.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I think there's an addition error on table 2-2. Or maybe it's just a decimal point that in the first column, the 2009-2010 usage.
I think it's a rounding thing in Excel.
Could be a rounding.
Yeah.
But we don't have data for some of 2013-14 yet. And I'm wondering is the new business that you were talking about that was proposed to come in, is that the laundry business?
Yes,
So they haven't already gotten their water hookup.
that's correct, ma'am.
So that business is not included in any of this data or in our current usage.
That is correct.
And am I interpreting on the data that you had that if we go into the stage 4 drought, and it might not even be the minimum supply table 4-4 on page 15, the City of Brisbane allocation, the gallons per day, that is below our current usage.
Correct.
That's why it would be
Substantially
as
below our current usage.
Yes.
right. It's an estimate. If there was a 20% shortfall on the regional water system, the way that the drought allocations work between San Francisco and the wholesale customers, and then between the wholesale customers, would result in a 17% cutback to the City of Brisbane.
And that would be including any new water usage. We have a new development expanded development in the Northeast Ridge, and that all that water usage has not been calculated into any of the current year figures, because those aren't occupied.
Well, that's correct. And so the other complicating piece of the equation that we haven't brought in here is the very complex drought allocation plan that the Bauska customers have amongst themselves. And Anona, I'm sure, knows that a lot better than I do. But generally what happens is it's a rather complex calculation that takes into account the city's individual supply guarantee. So it recognizes the fact that we're entitled to 0.98 million gallons a day, even though we're using, in the mid-50s. It looks at the rolling 3-year average that you've used, so that's why it brings us down lower. And then it also makes an adjustment. In particular, I don't know what we actually call this, but I've always referred to it as East Palo Alto adjustment, because really what it is to make sure that no single water customer, as a result of their adjustment, has to go down so low that it's an incredibly unreasonable burden. And I think, did we pick 35 gallons per day, Anona? Is that, or was it 40?
I think it's 40 or 45.
It's one of those. So it's a number that's not too far away from where we would be if we dropped 10 to 15%. So then all of those things are calculated, and then depending upon where you've been, it changes it. So that's always what's been kind of counterintuitive about drought planning, is that you want to be a really good person and you really want to minimize the amount of water you use, but then you sort of get penalized for it at the end when they do the calculation, because they're looking at your average like, hey, you've been living on 50, why can't you take a 10% cut? Well, because you've been living on 150. That's, it doesn't work out well, but it's been very, very difficult to find a way that's truly fair, because there is no good one-size-fits-all. So we have to work together, certainly within Bauska. It's what we've always tried to do, and that's why actually the final decision on that is left to the board. If the agencies don't unanimously agree to support it, it goes to the board of directors, and then they make a decision there. And that's why we also do these water shortage contingency plans, so that we try and control our fate as much as we can where we can. So I'm not encouraging everybody to go home and flush the toilet twice or let the water run while you're brushing your teeth. But yeah, we do get penalized a little bit for being good water users. And what happens there is, and it's what I've talked about, for about a decade now, is that what we start to reach, particularly us as Brisbane, and other people are starting to experience, is that our water use is getting to the point where it is not elastic, because we're about as tight as we can be. And the analogy we've used is, we had a development that was proposed at Parcel 3 at Sierra Point And that was going to be a high lead water efficiency development. And, you know, when you have waterless urinals, when you have ultra low flush toilets, when you have no showers on site, when you have xeriscape, how do you ask them to cut back 10%? What do? They bring water from home to make coffee. I mean, because that's the only other discretionary use they have. They have no other place to cut back. And if not for the fact that we have a lot of irrigated land here, we would be in that same position. It would be very difficult.
Okay. I understand about the already low usage and that we will have a harder time making that. But what I'm saying is that our water usage, our current water usage, isn't based on any growth projections. And so the growth that has happened in the last year is not built into the system. And so we need to be very careful about any additional growth that we plan or anticipate, because we may not have the water for that.
So are you talking about that in terms of during the drought, ma'am?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yes. So then that's completely in sync with what we've done here in the stages. That's why we have the authority to look and decide not to issue new meters.
Correct.
Right,
But
exactly.
even what has happened in this prior year, in the 12 months prior to today's date, is not reflected in these figures, where we may be using more of some of that water because of the growth that we've already
Exactly. No, you're right. Okay, I understand your point. Sure.
been allocated any water
Sure.
under these numbers. And I know it's hard to come and get a today's date on water usage and plan, since I'm sure this paperwork started, several months ago to get this data to us. But I just think it needs to be clear. We've got, a large development that isn't, is not occupied. Not fully occupied, and certainly the numbers in that development have not been put into this.
Oh, exactly. So if 200 people move in there and they're using 50 gallons a day, there's 10,000 gallons of increased consumption while we're trying to reduce. You're right, and that's what we struggle with.
Correct.
Is how do we represent that? And how do we say, geez, are we meeting our reduction targets while we're still having some growth, and what's a reasonable amount and what isn't? And we keep coming back to these very objective criteria that people have set up, and it doesn't always make sense.
Right. No, and that's just my comment that I wanted
Point on. Thank you.
to bring out. So, thank you.
Can I make one additional
Yeah.
comment and tagging on to that? Because I was thinking also, and I have my other comments, but I was thinking also, as I was reviewing the materials, about what about the houses at the Northeast Ridge? And, would that push us, not just would it increase our water usage, but would it push us to become like an urban water user under the water code? And it seemed like that would not be anywhere near that. But what about, it's like a snapshot of, in time of water usage. What about vacant businesses like the VWR location? That's a big facility that's not currently occupied. So at what point in time was our water usage considered? And what if that ends up, being occupied by another business?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean. I'm glad you're feeling our pain, ma'am. This is really refreshing. I mean, I think no, really, because I think it's really evident that the council gets it. You get the challenges that we're facing. So, yeah, we've had that, and Jerry is like, geez, Randy, we just had this conversation again today. This is the other thing we talked about, because it was driving him nuts, because he's like, well, we had a couple of businesses out at Sierra Point that last year didn't have any use because they had been sold, right? We had at least 3 buildings out there that were sold and weren't occupied, and they're hardly using any water. Now they're turning their sprinklers back on because they want to sell the business. They're trying to make it look nice, and they're trying to get their grass green. How do we deal with that? Well, we don't really deal with it. We try and manage it. We try and talk with them as we implement these ordinances, and as we go to the water shortage contingency plan, we will try to get them on their best practices of water uses. And how we end up explaining that, if we're asked to explain it, is where the challenge comes in. So what am I going to do? Tell a business that's got a water meter, well, hey, you didn't use it last year, you can't turn it back on? I guess. I don't want to go there. That's very, very difficult, because we are, and again, because of the point where we're at, because we don't have a lot of leeway, it starts to come down to like, wow, do you decide that your economic recovery is not important enough? Because if you started doing that to businesses, it's likely they might say, "What? I'm not going to relocate a business to here if we don't have water. What kind of business is that?" Even if it's just for a little bit of lawn, it's a real challenge. This is probably doing this for almost 30 years now. This is about the most difficult drought that we've been through, just because we've all become such good water users here in Northern California.
So then, when the ordinance states, that it calls for at the various stages a reduction of by at least 10 or 20%, at what point in time is that percentage, is that amount being determined?
It's the average over what period? What's the language? I'm sorry, I'm not speaking to you. I'm looking to my brain trust. Over the last 5 years? Thank you, Eugene.
Okay.
So again, if you use a lot of water over the last 5 years, it's a good thing. If you didn't, it's a bad thing. If you had your water turned off for a year, your average would be really low. And that might be someone that would come in and say, well, geez, we need to appeal that. You can't use the average of 2 years when the building was unoccupied.
Yeah, we just came out of the Great Recession. I mean, so we had a ton of vacancies. So you can't use that data. I mean, it's not. I mean, you have to.
It's a challenge.
But I mean, it's challenging.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, we had the opposite challenge in the last drought, all right? Because in 2007 we were in the economic recession, right? So we didn't have a lot of businesses in the parks. They weren't using a lot of water. It was easy to get our cut back. It was being done for us.
Yeah. Interesting.
Well, obviously, we have a lot of issues to deal with and economic things to go through.
I have one other question, if I may.
Okay, yes, of course.
One of the solutions being discussed, of course, is recycled water and use of gray water systems and so forth. But I recall whenever that came up in the past, there are some restrictions that the state puts on for health reasons that make it difficult to actually use certain kinds of recycled water, even for irrigation purposes, if it's going to be on a park where kids are going to be, et cetera, there. So I'm wondering, have those regulations been loosened up, or we still got that problem?
Go ahead, and you got it?
No, actually, in the last couple of years, the state board has taken two separate actions, most recently in the end of June, and prior to that in 2009, to really encourage the use of recycled water. And tertiary treated water is really an unrestricted use application. What happens sometimes locally is a local body will say, we don't want to use that recycled water, on playing fields or whatever, but that's sort of at the local jurisdiction where that determination is made. As long as it meets the tertiary treated standards, you can swim in it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the state has loosened up a little, what you're saying?
Yeah, they're really encouraging it, especially in light of the drought. I think what ends up being the restriction on recycled water is really the cost, because you have to do a whole new distribution system. Right. So what people are moving to now is sort of into the indirect or direct potable reuse, because then you don't have to build a whole separate infrastructure. But we're still a ways away from that, although it has been done at least indirectly in California now.
I know that Redwood City won some kind of award for what they were doing with recycled water. I don't know exactly what their program is.
So they have at their local wastewater treatment plant it's a JPA. So they built a tertiary treated system there, and they have a pretty progressive ordinance with respect to where recycled water use is allowed. Initially, there was a lot of pushback on use of recycled water for irrigation, and particularly parks and such. Interestingly enough, during the last drought, a lot of that resistance went away when the alternative was to stop irrigating. And so now it's being used more extensively within the city. But yeah. And they have plans to triple the size of that facility and bring it into the other side of 101. But it's a cost issue for them now.
So we don't have access to any tertiary treated water from San Francisco? They don't do that? Or do they?
They do not. They're piloting a plant right now, and they are working on a joint project with Daly City on the west side. The closest plant we had was the city of South San Francisco. We participated in a joint study with them. It was South City, Cal Water, SFPUC. I don't believe Como was involved in it. But we looked at that, and again, as Nona pointed out, the problem is because of the distance and having to create a distribution system. We actually had enough use here that we could do something with it, but just having to run a plant all the way from South City's plant, I mean, having to run the piping up here just puts your
expensive.
per unit cost through the roof.
Right.
But
Although it is projected for the Baylands, that was one of the questions that I had asked Randy by email about recycled water, because it says in the report that it wasn't considered something that we could do for at least the next 10 years or so. But it is in the plans for any Baylands proposal to have a recycled water facility plant there. But one question I had was about what about cisterns? You know, if people want to collect rainwater and use that for irrigation, is that something that is allowed? Because I've heard some talk about that.
Well, it's allowed in San Mateo County. I mean, there's not a program that's run here, and I think there you have to look at sort of the cost benefit. I mean, those are the programs that I'm aware of in San Mateo County are really residential based, and again, you look at the water use profile in the city, and such a small fraction of the water use is for irrigation and residential accounts that, you know, those programs usually don't pencil out, you know, strictly in terms of a volume of water savings.
We do have guidance on the use of rain barrels. That was Ms. Cunningham brought that to us a number of years ago, and we published it. We put it on the website. I don't know how many people have actually used it. I know at one point in time, Billy over at the hardware store was going to participate in some program, but just it doesn't generate a ton of interest. It's hard, and this is the conversation we have with other people where people talk about, you know, well, why don't you collect stormwater and why don't you do that? Well, the challenge we always run into is that when it rains, you don't need the water so much. Right, so now you've got to find a way to store it, and store a lot of it for months and months. Right, we're talking about 500,000 gallons of water a day. That's a water tank, right? That's a huge water tank. How many days worth of storage did you want to have? And then recognize that you've got to treat that water then, right? So now you're going to have to chloraminate it. You're going to have cross-connection control on it. It just becomes incredibly expensive. Even, you know, well, maybe in today's day, it's $2 a gallon for storage. So 1 million gallons to store 1 day's worth of water, because somebody thought it might be a good idea to capture it running off the mountain. And that's just to get into the game. So it starts to be really expensive. And then we have yet to even have the whole conversation about what are you doing to the bay when you're not allowing stormwater to run to it? What are you doing to the hydrologic cycle once you've decided to do that? Water business is a good business. It's a lot of fun. It's very interesting, particularly if you're an engineer.
It does strike me that this seems to be an area, particularly if we have, you know, long-term droughts, and that's kind of the future of California, that the state may think about providing some subsidies for, you know, bringing down the cost of recycled water. Because if there's a relatively nearby plant and it's being done, and the only reason, and they're willing to share it, and the only reason it doesn't make any sense is because of the expense. And for small cities, I mean, it's just impossible. The only way that can happen is from, you know, subsidies from the state.
Well, I think that's a big chunk of the water bond has money for water recycling in it. So should it pass, there should be additional funds available.
But for this kind of purpose, or do we know yet?
Yeah, basically to construct a water recycling and delivery systems.
So for us, it's the delivery system that's the problem.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's something where should the water bond pass, you know, you guys as part of BOSCA are part of the Bay Area Integrated Regional Water Management Planning Group, and they've been very successful over the years in getting funds for different, you know, projects, et cetera. And so if, you know, you guys want to be project proponents with other sort of entities that use the South City plant, you know, you could put that project forward and see if you got grant funds. But even if you got grant funds, you still have to have, you know, 25% or more matching. So, I mean, there's still a substantial cost.
I got a question, Terry. So, Randy, you know, when we were looking at how much Brisbane uses, how much folks that are part of Bosqua, how much they use, and then how much the rest of the state uses. So, in your dealings in the water world, I mean, are there ever any discussions about, you know, having some exemptions for cities that use, you know, that are below 50% average of California users? I mean, just trying to, you know, have something that, you know, acknowledges our conservation efforts.
Yes.
And then not, you know, handcuffing our ability to, you know, to have some economic development.
So, in these isolated droughts, the answer is no. But in the long term, yes. I don't remember the name of the bill that came out, but there was a plan called 20 by 2020 that had to be developed, and what this plan did was it looked at the state of California, divided up into its individual unique hydrologic regions as determined by the Department of Water Resources, and it established in their per person levels of consumption of water per day that they wanted us to reach by 2020, and we're already there. We don't have to go there because there are exemptions because we're small systems, but we're already at that level. Mm-hmm. So the answer is yes, that they're in different regions. The challenge is people live in different places, right? I mean, do we say it's wrong to live somewhere where it's hotter? It's a hotter climate. Do we say it's wrong? The example Mr. Jensen used to like to use all the time as well. How much water should a horse get? You know, if you live somewhere where we have horses, they're big animals. They need a lot of water. Do they have to take certain reductions? Are they not entitled to that? They're very, very complex questions that really come down to, you know, decisions we make as a society. I mean, I always look at it and say, you know, hey, if you chose to live west of the Mississippi, you kind of knew you were going to have water problems. I mean, go back and read Cadillac Desert. That's what it talks about. I mean, throughout the entire world, people that live on the east side of whether it's an island or a country tend to have more water, and those are on the west tend to be on the drier side, and that's what happens. But everybody likes to, not everybody, obviously, but a lot of people like to live where it's drier. A lot of people like where it's a little warmer. We choose to live in those climates. So what happens to us as a result of that? And then we get these other complicating factors that continue as the population grows, as our businesses and economy grows, our consumption of fossil fuels, consumption of water. Yeah, we start to get some real challenges with the amount of footprint we put on the resources of this planet.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, Randy, you also talked about Zero Point, so we have these two new buildings. So I know they're doing some, you know, fairly, you know, substantial remodel. With part of that remodel, are we also addressing some of the, you know, landscaping needs, you know, readdressing that?
I can't answer that question off the top of my head. I'm sorry. I'll have to ask John Swicky, the planning director, to see if the proposed remodel is going to trigger our exterior landscaping water conservation ordinance.
Okay. Thank you.
So if we don't have any more questions for staff, should we open the public hearing?
Mm-hmm.
Do I hear a motion?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you so much.
All in favor, a second?
Yeah,
Motion
sure.
to close the public hearing?
No,
Yeah.
open the public hearing.
Open.
Open it. We're going to open it.
Yeah.
Well, maybe the supervisor's office has it.
So did somebody second it?
Yeah, if you want to remote.
Second.
Sure.
Okay, and so public hearing is now open. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak? Seeing none, do I hear a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
So I did have a few more comments.
Of course.
Now that the public has had a chance to weigh in. So in the materials, it talked about how in the past there have been rebates offered through the city for water conservation, and I asked Randy about that, and he said that what we presently offer, and he said high efficiency clothes washer rebates and the high efficiency toilet rebates. I wasn't even aware of this, and you know, I've purchased a washer, dryer, and toilets in the last few years, and you know, it would be great for residents to know about these. So I don't know if there's a way, maybe when we send information, if we could remind people that these rebates exist. And can you explain how they work?
Well, the basic way they work is that if you go out and you purchase a qualifying device, and there are certain standards that you have to go by, and you just bring the receipt into us, we issue a rebate for it. That information's out there. The hard part is, we are just in an information intense world, right? Everybody's email and snail mail and conversational life is overwhelmed with white noise, and we put that information out there. And oftentimes, even if you go to buy a washer at Lowe's, they will tell you that, oh yeah, there are rebates out there, and they'll hand you the form for PG&E, and they'll say you ought to check with your water supplier too. They might have it, and even then, people miss it.
Yeah, they usually ask you, what city you're from.
Okay.
They'll say, oh, by the way, Brisbane's got this thing. Yeah.
Okay, so when we put the information in the water bill about, how this is, what the process is going to be, I think it would be a good idea to remind people about the rebates, and also, have tips for how to conserve water. Like I've heard recently that, just turning off the water when you brush your teeth is a big water saver. The low flow toilets, things like that. So, just giving people information. And then also for the outreach, I hope that the city will specifically reach out to the hotels to tell them that they should be, if they're not already doing so, offering the optional service for linens to be laundered, not on a daily basis but upon request, and for also to the restaurants.
Sure.
As I'm sure that'll happen, that they should only serve water upon request. And those were all my comments.
No, I think those are good. I think those should be on with the information that is given to the public with the water bill.
It's and the information, and actually the way we've structured it is it certainly refers you right to the city website, and we've already got a listing of those water conservation techniques on the website, and on the back side of the little door hanger thing we've got, where you get your little, hey, you were wasting water, the back side of it has, oh, here are some tips. Okay. So you get a consolation prize with the door hanger as well. You get some free tips on how you can save water.
Any other discussion?
No.
So move introduction of ordinance number 589.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 And staff will assume that was the amended version of the ordinance, the red line version
Yes.
you received. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to staff reports.
I understand the city manager is having a great vacation, ma'am.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess for
And then mayor council matters, the economic development subcommittee. Do they have a report?
Yeah, so we met on July 23rd. I went back and checked my notes. There was a report done by the city intern that looked at economic development staffing programs throughout the county, and was really informative in just seeing what other cities have done. And then we started to talk about what our visions are for what do we want in terms of economic development for the city. And so after having that discussion, we realized that it wasn't just about our vision, myself and Cliff, but the whole council. So what will be happening next is that there will be an economic development visioning workshop that I believe will be scheduled for September, where we as a council can talk about what, if anything, we'd like to see in terms of economic development resources and staffing. And then the second thing we talked about was there was a proposal from Clear Channel for an electronic signboard at Sierra Point. I don't know if there's any update from staff on that.
Not at this time, ma'am.
Okay. And that's all for economic development, unless Cliff has anything to add.
in regards to that visioning workshop, so I think at the next meeting. I think it's September 2nd is our next full meeting. So that it'll be on the agenda for us to talk about, just saying, okay, this is what we're planning to propose to the council, and then schedule some kind of workshop with the full council and look at the different areas of Brisbane where we have commercial activity, downtown, Crocker Park, and we'll go over the ULI report as well, and get your feedback. And like Lori was saying, I mean, it would be helpful to get the full council's vision. What are the things that you like? What should we stick with? What can we improve upon? And so that we can take that feedback and hopefully craft a final economic development plan for the council.
And I'm sorry, I missed, did you say this was happening on our September 2nd meeting?
It's going to be agendized. Then from that, we'll pick dates.
Okay.
Probably sometime in October.
Okay.
It'll run out of time in September, so.
Right.
And then,
do you want to move on to public information and technology? Because
that's what I was going to ask you.
Okay, so I'm also on that one, and we met also on July 23rd. That's me and Clark on that subcommittee, and we talked about the social media use policy, and we considered, other systems that other cities use, like Fremont and South San Francisco, for receiving public input through social media. They both have their own systems. And we decided, as I mentioned previously, that we would stick with our current system, User Voice, which is a tab off of our city website, and that the city would educate the public more that that's out there to be used. And so that, I believe, has been done, that there's been a more of a public education campaign. And now we all received a few days ago from Caroline an update with a summary of any comments that were posted, so that we can see what any residents or other people may be posting online for feedback. And then the social media policy will at some point be presented to the council for its review. There were just some minor revisions made to that.
Thank you.
Excellent.
And then, go
I
ahead.
have a question, Lori. So, do you have any update on, trying to get the park, with having Wi-Fi throughout the industrial park? I know we I guess some company brought broadband up to Visitation. I mean, not Visitation, but Valley and Bayshore. I thought that we had.
The TV station was
That was
going to
TV
bring
ATSF was going to, that installation has never happened.
It didn't happen.
It never
really?
happened. We entered into the encroachment agreement with the fiber optic provider, but the contractor came down and pulled the permit and it died, and they haven't done the work, and they don't seem to answer the phone. So I'm not sure what's going on with that.
Okay, well, that's a shame. Okay.
Yeah, and I think for continuing it throughout Crocker Park, it's just a matter of whether other companies want to incur the cost of bringing fiber optics in. Of course, it's a good thing, but it's up to the individual businesses to pay for that. And if this one were to go through, it's unfortunate that it seems to have stopped, but it would have allowed for an outlet across the street from City Hall in case in the future we wanted to bring fiber optics over here.
Yeah.
So.
It seemed like a great, kind of that perfect storm where you have someone who really wants it, brings it to the threshold of the park, and then from there, you could see other companies wanting to partner and running it through the rest of the park. But that's unfortunate that it kind of just
Hasn't
dead-ended.
happened yet.
Yeah, but we approved it, so we're friendly to the idea if businesses want to come forward with ideas.
So one additional countywide assignment subcommittee reports. is from the city attorney subcommittee, and I think David has a status for us.
I do. Thank you very much, Mayor Pro Tem O'Connell and members of the council. I wanted to announce publicly at the meeting tonight that due to an unexpected opportunity, I will be moving to Philadelphia later this fall. My wife Pam will become the new dean of the School of Education, the Graduate School of Education at the University of Pennsylvania, and I will be working with the Associate General Counsel's office, or as an Associate General Counsel, also with the University of Pennsylvania. The downside is that Philadelphia is quite a ways from Brisbane, which means that unfortunately I will no longer be able to serve as Brisbane City Attorney. I will greatly miss the community, the council, and the very interesting issues that the city of Brisbane has, and very much appreciate the opportunity and the privilege to work with you over the last several years on those issues. I will be working closely with the city manager and the city staff to ensure a smooth transition. And again, thank you very much for the opportunity to work with the city of Brisbane.
Thank you, David. And with that, I want to thank you for the service that you've given us and wish you all the luck on your continuing endeavors. And I hope that we can do a smooth transition through your firm. And on that note, the city attorney subcommittee, which consists of Councilmember Miller and I, met last week to discuss the transition, and we have no formal report, but we are working on the transition and process that we will bring forward to the council and to staff to alleviate the city attorney issues. So, if there's any comment you'd like to make.
So I guess we had made somewhat different decisions, so we need to confer here publicly. And that has to do with the process we're going to follow. Because we met as a subcommittee with the potential replacement for David, who was also a top-rated candidate in the recruitment process. And we, that is the subcommittee, Terry and I were, comfortable with the proposal that he might be the next city attorney, and so we asked if he would, make a commitment by letter that he would be the real full-time person, and that we're getting a human being and not just a firm. And he was very willing to write that kind of a letter. And then, of course, since he has become of counsel to David's firm, then the contract would be presumably with that firm, but he would be the replacement in that contract. And so we were thinking, and this comes down to whether we need to meet next Monday or not, and this becomes an issue for all of us to consider. The four of us who were part of the earlier recruitment process are quite familiar with this proposed replacement, and having interviewed him, knowing about him, and so forth. So the only member of the council who does not, at least so far as we know, met this potential new city attorney is Laurie. Now,
No, I have not.
You haven't met him yet, right?
No, I was assuming I would meet him on Monday.
Okay. So we were thinking that since the rest of us have already met him and obviously are comfortable with him, that really the meeting that needs to happen is not necessarily the meeting of the full council, but the meeting of only member of the council who has not had the opportunity to sit down and talk with the replacement. So, potential. So, I guess the discussion, and then of course we understand that, Clark is coming back on that very day sometime. And whether that's the, he might be able to be there if the plane arrives on time and so forth, but that seems, pretty burden on him. And if the rest of us is sort of comfortable to go ahead and make a recommendation on the 2nd, then it would seem to us anyway that what would need to happen is for Laurie to be a part of the conversation, which hasn't happened yet, and then for us to meet on the 2nd with the the letter from the replacement opportunity attorney and the new contract. And so that's when we'd have the closed session, and then if we express our agreement at that point, then we'd have to have it on the regular agenda. Now, I don't know exactly what date, David, we're talking about having to have all this accomplished, and I know you had mentioned a date, but I don't know, is that still firm or what?
At least tentatively, my last scheduled date with the firm on a full-time basis would be September the 12th, although I will be available, of course, to provide transition services and advise after that. So my understanding, at least before your last comments, Councilmember Miller, were that there was going to be the closed session on the 25th, at which both the candidate and the assistant city attorney would both attend, have the opportunity to meet with the full council, discuss, and hopefully reach agreement with the council in terms of going forward. That on the 2nd, there would be both the revised agreement reflecting the change, as well as the commitment letter from the new candidate. Those would both be on the public agenda for the 2nd, at which point the council would take action.
I mean, that's assuming that we're going to be fine on the 25th. I mean,
Yep.
So I think we need to have the meeting on the 25th, and then we'll see what happens.
Okay, well, in our subcommittee discussions, and of course, we need to make sure that at this point this is, tentative, and this is not it's not a long-term commitment, and it doesn't preclude any other action being taken. This is an interim position we're going to need to fill, and so that's why I had hoped that we would have a copy of the letter of intent and the proposed contract changes before we went into closed session, so we'd have time to review that. And that's why I didn't think we would need the meeting until the 2nd. But staff had encouraged in an email, I think yesterday, before Clay went out of town, that we have the meeting on the 25th. And that sort of goes against what we discussed in our subcommittee meeting, whether the 25th was the best date to have a closed session, if we would be prepared for that closed session.
So I guess what we're recommending, but it's for us to decide, of course.
We need to discuss this.
Okay, so
we need to
you don't
discuss
think
it.
that there's
We're
enough
making a
time?
recommendation, and let's discuss
Okay,
it.
so what you're saying is that you don't think there's enough time from now to the 25th to have proper information to interview the two attorneys? So I'm trying to understand, because
we had wanted to make sure Laurie had the opportunity to meet prior to us meeting as a council.
As a group.
Okay, I can do that. I didn't realize that. I mean, I
That's what we're
couldn't have
recommending.
realized it until you
That's
spoke
what
to
we
me.
had recommended, and that's
So.
what- and we had reached out.
Okay. Well, I'd be happy to see if he and I are both available between now and Monday evening. If I could meet with him first, is that what you're suggesting? That I meet with him I mean, today's Thursday, so it would be
Well-
either tomorrow or Monday.
If you had, if it had been available to meet with him first, I
Sure.
don't think we would have needed to push Clark, and we thought it might be pushing Clark to attend a meeting the moment he gets off a plane from vacation to attend this meeting.
Is there a reason why we have to have the meeting next Monday? Can it be later during the week?
Well, our next meeting would be, the next available date is the 2nd, and we need to,
For closed session?
Well, actually, Clark had originally recommended the 28th,
and Lori.
Oh,
I
right.
heard you were out of town. Is that changed?
I'm not available on that date.
Okay, so that's why
Why we had to try
it
to,
came earlier, and then we're thinking, well, maybe that's kind of pushing it. Maybe it would be better if you could meet with him beforehand, and then we would have the session with
What-
everybody on the.
When is Clark returning to town? On Monday?
If in my recollection was that Clark was concerned that the rest of the council, and particularly Lori, Councilmember Liu, have a chance to meet with the candidate before the second. There was I think an extensive discussion, and my recollection is that Clark's direction or decision was that, because he had had the opportunity to meet a number of times before, that it wasn't critical that he be there on the 25th, since that was the only date that seemed to work before the 2nd. That's why that was set for the 25th. Now, in terms of having a draft agreement and the letter from the candidate, that should be available by tomorrow afternoon, so the council would be able to have that, I believe, in advance of the meeting on the 25th, if that was an issue. I know that we've been working on to get that to you before the 25th.
If you're feeling very rushed because Clark will not be returning until the 25th, I'm willing to change my plans, and we can move the meeting to the 28th. If
I'm not sure at this point if the 28th would work for the proposed candidate, because now we're trying to, when we had met in the subcommittee, we had thought the 2nd would work as closed session on the 2nd. And so he had said he would be available for the 25th or the 2nd. I don't think we have a commitment for the 28th. And there are some, minor things that I think that we do need to discuss as a council before we, put this forward as our direction. But again, those are things that should be discussed in closed session. So, I'm,
One possible suggestion would be to keep the meeting for the 25th, because both the candidate and Councilmember Liu have set that aside on their calendars. It does not have to be noticed as a closed session. It can be, the closed session can be canceled, but what it would be an opportunity for the meeting to take place with Councilmember Liu. Then the closed session with the entire council can be scheduled for the 2nd, when I know that I've discussed it with the candidate, because that's the white paper presentation. He very much wants to be there at my suggestion because of the importance of the issues in that white paper. So he's planning to be at the meeting on the 2nd in any event, and certainly would be available, I believe, in advance of the 7:30 start time for a closed session. The only drawback would be that if there were any significant changes or modifications that required some additional time, it might be hard to accomplish those between the end of closed session and the open session that would immediately follow. But my suggestion would be that if there were any changes that couldn't be accomplished, the council can just give direction and they could be accomplished in the next day. So I don't think it would prevent anything from moving forward. My thoughts.
if the council is of the mind set that we think we might be. At this point, I think that to make sure that we have our ducks in a row, I guess we should schedule the closed session then for the 25th and go ahead with that. And
He was just recommending something different, so.
that's, well, he was somewhat recommending something different, but That's assuming that we don't have any issues that we think we need to talk about, and we're going to be very rushed. So I'm torn.
If I may, through the chair. So, David, so we have our meeting on the 25th, and then we could have a closed session prior to our regular meeting on the 2nd. If the council felt it needed more time, we could move it to another closed session after the 2nd, correct? I mean, we don't have to, formalize anything the night of the 2nd, correct?
That's correct. It would be advisable to have something formalized probably before the 12th, but certainly
because you're going to be leaving. I know, so I just want to know what all our options are.
Yeah.
Run out.
So I mean, we can set something else up. So I don't.
I'll have to take you to custody.
I think what we have in place is, works. And if after our meeting on the 25th, we have a closed session on the 2nd. If we need more time, then we just schedule it.
And if you'd like, I can schedule an additional meeting with the candidate myself prior to the meeting on the evening of the 25th, so I can have a chance just to meet him one-on-one and ask any questions prior to our closed session, where we'll have a different discussion, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yeah,
please.
We were just kind of thinking, we were trying to think through process and what made the most sense. And so we're trying to achieve a couple objectives, and one of which is we want to make sure that the member of the council who has not even met the potential new city attorney to have a significant conversation. And it struck us that would be better if he did it one-to-one.
Yeah, and I would prefer, if I could do that, then I would just schedule it during the day.
And he is expecting that. We talked about that
Okay.
at the meeting, and he's very open to that, and as a matter of fact, was very enthusiastic about doing
Okay.
that, because the rest of us have had these conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And so we know the person, and so we don't need the kind of background conversation that you should have.
Okay.
So that was kind of the first step in the process.
Mm-hmm.
And then the question was, can all that happen before the full council gets together to talk about, the broader issues of, okay, is this contract okay? Do we have any additional things we want to do or change some things, or, all that kind of stuff, which is subsequent to being familiar with the person. And,
Right.
That's a different set of issues.
Mm-hmm.
Well, perhaps if you
And the
could.
question is, are we ready to do that by the 25th?
Yeah.
That's kind of the concern.
And
we
will
had.
Clark be back and available?
Will
And
Clark be really effectively
Wait.
available for that? Because it's not a question of meeting him. It's a question of really being part of this second level of issue conversation.
Why don't we then, I can meet with the candidate, on the 25th or before then, on my own, and then we can schedule a closed session for the 28th if the candidate is available on that day, and that would give Clark more time. And
What about leaving it on the 25th? If you met him on the 25th, and then we met,
or we could, we could do it. I mean, I wouldn't be
because we already have it scheduled, and everyone else seems to be fine with that.
sure.
Trying to,
and I'm not sure that the candidate needs to be present at our discussion.
well,
Okay.
But we haven't gotten
Well, I personally would like to talk to him, because he had changed his opinion, and then he went back to what he wanted to originally do when he was interviewing, and so I want to talk to the man face to face and understand what we're going to be getting from him.
Why don't we do
Yeah.
this? Why don't
Council-
we meet with him from 7 to 7:30?
Right, and I thought we
Start
could
at
do that on the
7:30.
25th.
Yep. That was my question, Councilmember Lewin. If you're available just in advance of the meeting, then I can certainly talk to him and ask him to come at whatever time is convenient for you in advance of the meeting for a one-on-one meeting, and then you can proceed with the closed session on the 25th after that, as that's been scheduled, and then determine based on that meeting whether you need to have an additional closed session or any other information before you move ahead.
Okay, sure. The earliest I would be available in the evening would be 7 p.m. I am available during the day, but it might make sense for him to just come once and not,
The meetings is,
it's at, is at 7, so
would it make
can that
sense
be moved to 7:30?
7:30 or 8 o'clock to give you as much time as you need? I mean, how much time would you want with the candidate in advance?
Oh, you need at least an hour.
All right, let's do 7 to 8. We'll have a nice discussion for an hour. And then
And we'll all come in at 8 o'clock.
8 o'clock for closed session.
Because the kind of question you just asked, Cliff, that's exactly what we're talking about.
Sure,
Yeah, because that's key.
absolutely.
So we're going to set up a closed session for 8 p.m. on the 25th.
Correct. And I will meet with him one-on-one at 7 p.m.
So let me
And
just,
that's the problem, is that, you know, it's getting late, and that's what Ray had said, or Clark had said, was that he didn't want it to be really late. But we'll let him make that call when whether he's still awake.
yeah, so the only potential glitch in this is if Clark gets delayed or he doesn't make it, or, you know,
Right.
because Clark needs to be a part of the conversation
Yes.
too. That's another concern we had. I'm thinking now that, you know, if something does happen and he doesn't make it for some reason or other, then we may have to have another kind of meeting like you said, Cliff.
We could do the
Make sure
closed
everybody's
session.
there.
Well, could we have an emergency closed session
right.
3 days later on the 28th?
Yeah,
Right.
prior to our meeting on the 2nd.
Right. Is that all clear as mud?
Well, I'm just a little confused on what we're trying to gain here, sir, because I thought what I heard was that 3 of the council members don't really see the need to meet with this candidate and the assistant city attorney at this point in time because you've been through the interviews with these people and you're satisfied with them. I'm not sure where Mayor Conway stands. I think from what I've heard from you is that his concern was that he wanted to make sure that Councilmember Liu had the opportunity to have FaceTime with this person, have one-on-one, because she did not have that benefit from having gone through the earlier city attorney things. The issue of the contract, I don't think is going to be terribly problematic. It's going to be the exact same one that your current city attorney is under. It's the same law firm.
Yeah.
It's going to be exactly the same. So I don't want to point you in the wrong direction, but it seems to me that, you know, if Mr. Conway has already met the person and is satisfied with them, it may be that there are 4 out of 5 of you who don't feel the need for a closed session, and it may just be handy. I just got the hook. and there's certainly some value, and I think in leaving that date aside so that Councilmember Liu and these folks can meet. But I don't know that there's going to be a lot of value in your times in going to that meeting. It seems that you could decide not to. You
Well,
could
we
put the
place
9.
on it, but we can't not notice it if we do want to have it.
That's exactly correct. So you need to make a decision tonight on that because we're running out of time for noticing. That's
Yes.
correct.
Well, we need.
There you go.
I'm.
Now you can have it. Go ahead.
So, with all due respect to my boss here, my thought is that, I mean, I'm hearing from Councilmember Lentz that he would like the opportunity to have a further conversation, and just in terms of protocol, because whatever discussions took place were 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. It's generally my recommendation, and I think it would be frankly very useful for the council as a whole, because again, it's been 2 years. It's generally a really good thing to give you the opportunity to meet with your team as a group, and my recommendation would be that be in advance of the meeting on the 2nd. So my thought is that the best plan would be to continue with having Councilmember Liu meet at 7 to 8, have closed session at 8 o'clock. If Mayor Conway is available, then that would be the best of all possible worlds. If he's delayed and he's not, then I think you can still have that discussion. And then if Clark feels the need, Mayor Conway feels the need to have a second closed session, that could take place either later in the week, depending on the availability, or certainly on the 2nd, when everybody will be present as well. So I think that might address all the concerns that the council has.
That works for me.
I think that's what I sort of said, was that we set up the meeting and then we go from there.
Okay. And will we be receiving a draft of the proposed engagement agreement before the 25th? Is that my understanding?
Yes, you should.
Okay.
I'll try to get that to you by tomorrow afternoon at the
Okay.
latest.
Thank you.
And the letter, yes.
So actually, it's already been noticed, right? That's already been sent out, right?
I'll amend the agenda tomorrow.
Just amend it. That's all, you just need to amend it, right?
To 8 p.m.
Okay.
Okay, so written communications. We had a written communication from Karen Cunningham with some points about water savings and a movie to watch that I'm not sure how many copies we got, but we'll note that. And I already mentioned a letter from Dana Dilworth. And that moves us on to League of California Cities Annual Conference Resolution Package. And I think that they are asking the council to give direction to their voting members who will be attending the League Council, the League Conference. And that, I believe, is everyone but me?
No, I'm not going.
Oh, you're not going to this one?
No.
Okay. So that's Clark, who is the primary voter
That's
delegate.
correct, yes.
And I'm assuming everyone's read the one resolution that they are wanting to make sure we're very up on.
Mm-hmm.
And does anyone have an issue with support of that resolution? I think we can give direction to Clark to support that. Any other comments? Do we need to vote on that, or is that just a,
No, it probably would be a good thing to have it on the record.
okay?
So I would move that we instruct our voting delegate to vote in favor of the resolution dealing with setting up a conference to talk about the environmental problems from the growing of, or the illegal growing of marijuana.
On state and public lands, yes.
Right.
And
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
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 And that brings us to oral communications number 2. Is there any members of the public who would like to speak? Seeing no hands, I would request adjournment in memory and honor of longtime resident and good personal friend, Jess Salmon.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So move.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Meeting adjourned.
Good job, Terry.